Hello, and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, and I'm here to tell you a story.
And I didn't have the script open. And my name is Scott Daly. And Matt, I want you to tell me about the worst thing you've ever done.
Well, I won't tell you that, but I'll tell you about the worst thing that ever happened to me.
All right, go ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you are all having a wonderful Friday evening. I'm sure we know a lot of the people here, but if you're joining us here for the very first time, say hello in chat and welcome. We, the two of us and some other people, are Doof Media. We make podcasts all about the stories we love. We also do this right here, this monthly book club. Matt,
We do.
explain what is a book club? Do we even know what a book
Uh,
club is?
I mean, I don't know. What is anything? In this particular situation, each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all the supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/DoofMedia, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it. And you know what? I think I do know the worst thing that's ever happened to me, Scott. It was to get my second COVID shot. Just a handful of hours before having to do a very mentally taxing live performance in front of a microphone.
I mean, between the two of us, last month I was coming off of the first 3 days of having a child, and now this month you're coming off of being exhausted from a COVID shot. So it's been a couple of months for us.
Yeah, so this will be really entertaining for everyone, hopefully.
I think it will. So as Matt was saying, this is our book club. We meet here on the last Friday of the month, and we spend a couple of hours discussing the book. We pull slides of interesting moments. We talk about it for just a few hours, try to get to the bottom of these books. Matt, we didn't let our patrons vote this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We normally do, but once every 6 months, we take control of the book club back, and we make our own selections. And I picked this month, and I picked Peter Straub's Ghost Story. Matt, what is this book all about?
In the sleepy town of Milburn, New York, 4 old men gather to tell each other stories. Some true, some made up, all of them frightening. A simple pastime to divert themselves from their quiet lives. But one story is coming back to haunt them in their small town. A tale of something they did long ago. A wicked mistake, a horrifying accident. And they are about to learn that no one can bury their past forever.
That's pretty good summary there.
Yeah, I agree. That's a rare, excellent summary.
In the chat, we have who said Matt's audio was doubled, which was true. I fixed it. We are trying a little bit of a new setup, and I didn't do it right, and then I fixed it. So that should be good now.
Thanks for fixing it. Yeah. Appreciate that.
I also see David. How's it going, David? Everyone else that's here, also say hello. And as we move on to the next section, I want you folks to tell me what you thought of Ghost Story. And while you're doing that, Matt, I want you to tell me what you thought of Ghost Story.
I really like Ghost Story. I will say I particularly like the beginning, like the first half of the book. I would say the first half of the book was great, just like absolutely great. The second half of the book was good, very good. Worth talking about. I don't know why exactly. I thought about it a bit. I have some idea as to why. But I looked. I think this is one of those things where I think we'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah. For those that didn't join us last month, at the very end of the episode, I kind of outlined the reason for me picking this. A couple reasons. One of them was we are moving into season 2 of our Kingslingers podcast, where we'll be covering Stephen King books outside of the Dark Tower. 2 of those books are the books The Talisman and Black House that King co-wrote with Peter Straub, and I had never read a Peter Straub book on its own. I've only read, the only works of his that I've read are those 2 books. So I thought it would be a good idea before we move into those episodes that I get some understanding of who Peter Straub is as a writer. And also I heard this was one of the best ghost books, horror novels of the 20th century. And so I was kind of really, really looking forward to this. And I think I'm with you on this. I enjoyed this book a lot. It's doing a lot of things. It's not quite what I thought it was going to be. And it constantly surprised me about what it was doing throughout. But it is a horror novel in the vein of kind of very classic type of horror stories.
Hmm.
Um, it's Peter Straub is a very interesting writer. I think I'm trying to think of a way to say this and not have it come off mean, because I don't want it to come off mean. But he's a very meticulous, patient kind of writer. This is a story that starts off and then kind of just very, very intentionally ramps up its dread until we're breaking into a full just horror story with monsters and everything. But he takes his time with it. He takes a long time with all of our characters and the town. I mean, it's very King in that regard,
Hmm.
in that we meet this small town and we meet the cast of characters that live in this town, and we get to understand all who they are. And he uses those characters to kind of tell this really interesting story about not ghosts but people, and what people do and the ghosts that people create with their own actions. It's very interesting, and there's a lot to say about it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think just going based on what you were just saying there, I think I already have one clue as to why I like the first half so much more, which is that I think in terms of dread, I think he's a genius.
Mm-hmm.
I loved all of the like building tension and uncertainty about what's going on, and the mystery of like what's actually happening here, and just making everything really uncomfortable and scary without knowing what you're actually scared of.
Mm-hmm.
And then like when we started getting the answer to what we're supposed to be scared of, I like stopped being scared. Like, and I didn't really find it that scary, honestly. I
Yeah.
loved the book. Like I thought it was a great book. It's doing a lot of very interesting things that had nothing to do with horror, and I just didn't find it very scary. And I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Not entirely. I mean, so my opinion of this is a little colored by the situation in which I read it, which is my son is still sleeping in our bedroom right now, in a bassinet in our bedroom. So I cannot. My normal time to read is in my room, laying in bed before I go to sleep. I usually read for about an hour. I can't do that right now because I can't keep a light on. We're trying to keep it pitch black so he doesn't wake up. So
Hmm.
I've been reading on my own, like me and my dogs in my living room with one lamp on and like darkness surrounding me. And
Hmm.
so the creepy parts of this book got to me in a way that I don't think they would have had I read them in a different environment. So even at the end, I think I pulled a slide, which is one of the moments that really got me. That's closer to the end of the book. I agree with you. The thing about horror in general is the setup is always better than the payoff, in my opinion, which sucks. Like I, I just things are always scarier the less you understand about them, and the more you understand, it just gets not as creepy.
Hmm.
Um, but I think this book, when the book reveals what it's doing, with the big reveal of what the Chowder Society did, which I want to talk to you about that for a while, because I think it's really interesting the way Straub basically tells you what they did
Right.
before they do.
Yeah.
It's just sprinkled throughout the book so many times that you basically have the whole story in your head before you actually get them to tell the story.
Right.
But then the reason for it reveals a lot of the theming of the book, though. The why you get very quickly that they obviously killed this woman, but
Hmm.
the why of it is, I think, the most fascinating part, and why the reveal, them telling the story, is so impactful in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love all that stuff. Yeah. I think I really just wanted to say specifically that it didn't really make me very scared, but like
Sure.
everything, like it still works beautifully as just a tale.
Yeah.
It's very fun.
And it was not a page turner for me. Like, this was not a book that I like was anxiously like and excitedly turning the next page, and I would never describe it as a book I couldn't put down. It was a book that I picked up and I would read about 50 pages a day, and I would enjoy the pages I was reading. I never disliked them, but I wasn't like anxious to get to the end. I was just kind of sitting in it and enjoying it.
And for my part, I absolutely tore through the first half of it. At the front of this month, I binged. I was just like so into it, and then I got to a certain point, and it kind of like the proverbial hook in my mouth released, and then from that point on, I did what you just said. I kind of made my way through it, and it wasn't like it was never a slog. It was just like, oh, I'm no longer feeling compelled to read.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm not really meaning to come off as all this being negative. It's just like
No.
I think when something starts out like so incredibly strong and then it ends just being like really good, then that's gonna come off as like a letdown, even though it's like no, overall I had a great experience with it.
Sure, sure. It made me very excited to read these two King Straub books that we're going to be doing on Kingslingers because
Yeah.
I just recently reread Black House, and I did that before I read this book. And I'm thinking back on my reading of Black House, which is a book that I also kind of not struggled through, but I took my time with. I did not read that book very quickly, and I can almost in my head close my eyes and see this is definitely a page that Straub wrote. This is definitely a section of the book that Straub wrote, just based off of my feeling and understanding of the tone and the intentionality and the pace of this story right here.
That's fun.
But it's doing a lot of things. I mean, we're going to get into this. One of the biggest things that this is doing is kind of attempting to encapsulate an entire broad history of horror into one novel. We'll get into this a little bit in more detail, but he's taking every aspect. Like this book has werewolves and vampires and zombies and ghosts, and it's like it's all wrapped up into one thing. It's trying. It's ambitious in what it's trying to do.
Yeah, right. I thought that was a very fun idea that he's taking that the thing you sometimes see in kind of urban fantasy where it's like, well, actually, all of our understandings of these fantastical things are just stories that we've told about the true, deeper, more terrible creature that's out there.
All right, enough of
So,
this. Let's get into it because I have a lot I want to talk about.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right. So the first slide is the opening of the book. As usual, this is what we always do.
Mm-hmm.
What was the worst thing you've ever done? I won't tell you that, but I tell you the worst thing that ever happened to me. The most dreadful thing. 2. Because he thought that he would have problems taking the child over the border into Canada, he drove south, skirting the cities whenever they came and taking the anonymous freeways, which were like a separate country, as travel was itself like a separate country. The sameness both comforted and stimulated him, so that on the first day he was able to drive for 20 hours straight through. They ate at McDonald's and at root beer stands. When he was hungry, he left the freeway and took a state highway parallel to it, knowing that a drive-in was never more than 10 or 20 miles away. Then he woke up the child, and they both gnawed at their hamburgers or chili dogs, the child never speaking more than to tell him what she wanted. Most of the time she slept. That first night, the man remembered the light bulbs illuminating his license plates, and thought this would later prove to be unnecessary, and though this would later prove to be unnecessary, swung off the freeway onto the dark country road long enough to unscrew the light bulbs and toss them into a field. Then he took handfuls of mud from beside the road and smeared them over the plates. Wiping his hands on his trousers, he went back around the driver's side and opened the door. The child was sleeping on her back, straight against the seat, her mouth closed. She appeared to be perfectly composed. He did not know what he was going to have to do to her.
I love this opening.
Yeah.
This is a prologue, and I have on this show been on the record on how much I hate prologues.
Uh-huh.
But I think the way Straub does prologue here really gets to me. First of all, we're introduced to our protagonist here, Don, who is introduced as a kidnapper of a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have no context of who this girl is, but the introduction of the book is this man is kidnapping a little girl and driving south with her.
Yeah.
And it's a really fascinating choice.
Yeah. Right. And like clearly he intends on murdering her.
Yes.
But it's like he can't quite bring himself to do it. And there's obviously some weird stuff going on and you don't understand why. And I think like my assumption at the beginning of the book was frankly like, oh, this guy's crazy. Like he's like a serial killer who's crazy. And I had a pretty wrong impression about what the book was going to be about, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, you don't even know when you get into the book proper from this prologue, you're not exactly sure yet in the timeline of things where this takes place. You eventually learn that the prologue is events that occur at the end of the story proper, but
right.
You don't know that at first. And yeah, I mean, Straub takes his time here, even before we start to see that this little girl is acting funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like he takes his time with like moments of her, I need to go to the bathroom, and like he lets her do that, but like is still handcuffed to her, and like she's peeing, and he like cheats a glance at her, and of course you go to the worst possible guess on what that's for, and it's just really interesting that this is the guy that we're gonna root for throughout the rest of the book, and we're
Yeah.
introduced to him in this way that is intentionally made to think of him as a monster.
Yeah.
And of course, it's the exact opposite of that.
I mean, stupid question, but does the prologue call him, the man all the way through, or does it ever call him Don Wanderley?
It never calls him Don, but it does say the name of his brother.
Yeah, because I did put that together later, and then I was like, wait a second, like, okay, so this is the guy from the prologue, but then, like you said, you're confused about when that was supposed to be.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I assumed that we were going to get the context for this story when he told his whole backstory, and then we didn't, and then I just kind of forgot about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's because like he references in this prologue the events of a year ago or 2 years ago or something, and then in present day, or in the story proper, he's talking about the death of his brother, and you kind of link those two things together and think they're the same thing.
Yeah.
And I really feel like Straub's doing this on purpose, because he wants us to kind of realize over time that no, this is the end point of our story.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the end, I totally forgot that the prologue even happened. But yeah, I mean, I do think that he's doing something cute where he's toying with us and misleading us, and then when you get to the end of the book, you're like, I get it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then it recontextualizes all this. It'd be fun to reread this with that in mind.
I think the most important thing here, though, is this first subchapter that's only a line. What's the worst thing you've ever done? I won't tell you that, but I'll tell you the worst thing that ever happened to me, the most dreadful thing. And this is really interesting because a lot of this book, I think, is about people victimizing themselves for things that they are responsible for. You know, like, what's the worst thing you've ever done? Well, I'm not going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk about the worst thing that's ever been done to me. And it always, the reason for the worst thing that's being done to you always relates to the terrible thing that you've done, right? I mean, like, the whole inciting incident of this entire story is these 5 men killed this girl when they were younger and like hid her body in a swamp, and it's a thing that infested their lives and infested the world and created, maybe not literally created, because she was already something otherworldly, but transformed this force into a monster that was going to come haunt them and destroy their lives and destroy the lives of many, many people. And so it's just the way in which blame and who is responsible and who did this and the ghosts of this book reflect the person that they're haunting, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think maybe you could say that while, this demonic creature already existed, maybe she wouldn't have specifically gone and killed everyone in their town if they hadn't done this, if they hadn't killed her and basically really pissed her off.
The things that they've done gave her a door into their lives and this town and these people. And yeah, I mean, the monsters, the ghosts, are reflections of what people see in them. And I mean, this becomes almost textual when our guy Ricky like looks into a mirror and sees the truth in the mirror.
Yeah, this was one thing I was never totally clear on, and I think that's kind of okay, actually, because if it were too clear, then it would cease to be kind of mystical at all. But like the idea of like, do they have power over you in proportion to like how scared you are of them? I'm not sure if that's ever like literally said outright, but it sort of seems to work that way, where like the way they kill a lot of people, the way they kill some people is just like the werewolf guys like rip them apart, but the way they kill some people is they just like scare them so badly they jump out a window or something. And like it seems to me that the reason that the kid at the end is like as useful as he is because he's like not as scared of them in some way. Like he's just braver, I guess you could say.
I mean, you could get right down to it and get it to a place of accepted. Like, everyone in this book that is haunted by these ghosts has something terrible in their past, right? Is doing something terrible, is feeling guilty for something, is responsible for something. I mean, adultery, murder, like you name it, everyone in this town is doing something, and the ghosts always fuck with them in relation to that general idea.
Yeah.
And the people that survive seem to have accepted this part of them, and the people that
Yeah.
die cannot and are haunted by it until it destroys them in one way or another. In the physical way of a werewolf coming and ripping them apart, and in the more broad way of being so terrified and unable to face the truth that they throw themselves off a bridge or through a window or what have you.
Right. Yeah. I did. I don't think I'm actually clear on why Ricky was different from the other Chowder Society guys. Like, why did he get to live, and why was he never, you know, she seemed to treat him differently, and I'm not clear on why that was exactly.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll get to the bottom of that as we talk.
His in the chat says, "This prologue is so striking to me that I randomly had it come up in my mind as a standalone little vignette and been unable to remember what book it was even part of."
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, that sounds totally believable to me.
All right, let's move on to this next slide. I took 2 from the prologue, so you know how much I like the prologue when I took 2 from the prologue. This one is, I think, a little bit later in the prologue when we've started to key into that this is not just a little girl he's kidnapped here. What's your name? Angie, she smiled carelessly. Angie Mall. Where did you come from? You know. He nodded. What were your parents' names? I don't know. Who took care of you before I picked you up? It doesn't matter. Why not? They aren't important. They were just people. Was their name Mall? Her smile became more insolent. Does it matter? You think you know everything anyhow. What do you mean? They were just people. They were just people named Mitchell. That's all. And you changed your name yourself? So what? I don't know. That was true. So they looked at one another, he sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the knife behind him, and knowing that whatever was going to happen, he would be unable to use it. He supposed that David, too, had been unable to take life, any life but his own, if he had done that. The girl probably knew he was holding the knife, he thought, and simply dismissed it as a threat. It was not a threat. He, too, probably was not a threat. She had never been even apprehensive of him. Okay, let's try again, he said. What are you? For the first time since he had taken her into the car, she really smiled. It was a transformation, but not of a kind to make him feel easier. She did not look any less adult. You know, she said. He insisted. What are you? She smiled all through her amazing response. I am you. No, I am me. You are you. I am you. What are you? It came out in despair, and it did not mean what he had meant the first time he asked it.
Yeah.
This is good shit, man. This is good shit. And this is what I mean about the reflective mirror of the ghost, right? This is the prologue kind of making this a declarative statement, right? This woman, this girl who we will learn much, much later is a ghost. It looks at him and says, I am you. I am you. What you see in me, what you put in me, the hatred and the anger and the maliciousness, that's you. You're doing that. You're powering that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that it becomes even more clear at the end, the end of the book, where you see that this being takes on the forms that are really just from his imagination, really quite entirely sculpted by him.
Yeah, definitely. It's fucking wonderful. I love it.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'll say it again. I love the prologue so much. I love the dread and the mystery, and again, like, this is just the thing with me. Like, I love not knowing so much more than I love the answer. Like, almost universally. So of course I was gonna like this. So cool.
I love how Straub uses her smile and the changing nature of her smile to really ramp up the dread and uncomfortableness of this situation here.
Yeah. But I mean, before we leave the prologue entirely, I do think it's great how, like, for the first part of the prologue, you're like, okay, I get it. We have a horrible monster who is kidnapped a poor innocent girl, and like you want the little girl to get away.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he goes into the convenience store or whatever it is, you're like, oh, come on, little girl, tell the guy that that the man is kidnapping you so you can get away. And then, like, by the end of the prologue, you're just like, hold on a second, like, okay, the girl is some kind of weird thing, actually. this is not as simple as I thought it was,
Yeah.
and I love how that transforms over the course of the prologue so much.
Totally. It's so good. And then the prologue ends and you're kind of left not knowing what to think at all.
Yeah, yeah,
Hey, what's up, Count? Sorry, we
yeah,
were talking away there. Good to see
yeah,
you. Thanks for listening.
yeah. Thanks for joining.
Hmm.
Just feel free to participate.
Oh yeah. All right, let's move
Next,
into the story proper.
yeah. So here we have we meet our Chowder Society. Of all the rooms in which they habitually met, this was Ricky's favorite. The library in Sears James' house, with its worn leather chairs, tall indistinct glass-fronted bookcases, drinks on the little round tables, prints on the walls, the muted old Shiraz carpet beneath their feet, and the rich memory of old cigars in the atmosphere. Having never committed himself to marriage, Sears James had never had to compromise his luxurious ideas of comfort. After so many years of meeting together, the old men were by now unconscious of the automatic pleasure and relaxation and envy they experienced in Sears' library, just as they were nearly unconscious of the equally automatic discomfort that they felt in John Jaffrey's house, where the housekeeper, Millie Sheehan, forever bustled, rearranging things. But they felt it, each of them. Ricky Hawthorne, perhaps, more than the others, had wished to possess such a place for himself. But Sears had always had more money than the others, just as his father had more money than theirs. It went back that way for 5 generations, until you reached the country grocer, who had cold-bloodedly put together a fortune and turned the James family into gentry. By the time of Sears's grandfather, the women were thin, palpitating, decorative, and useless. The men hunted and went to Harvard, and they all went to Saratoga Springs in the summers. Sears's father had been a professor of ancient languages at Harvard, where he kept a third family house. Sears himself had become a lawyer because, as a young man, he had thought it immoral for a man not to have a profession. His year or so of schoolmastering had shown him that it could not be teaching. Of the rest, the cousins and brothers had most succumbed to good living, hunting accidents, cirrhosis, or breakdowns. But Sears, Ricky's old friend, had bluffed his way through until, if he was not the handsomest old man in Milburn, that was surely Louis Benedict, he was the most distinguished. But for the beard, he was his father's double, tall and bald and massive, with a round, subtle face above his vested suits. His blue eyes were still very young.
Man, so okay, few things here. Straub loves these extended paragraphs. Like we
Hmm.
see, this was all one paragraph. He loves to write in this and just to dive into description in these paragraphs, and I absolutely adore it. Like you reading that was just like music to my ears. I thought it was wonderful. But I wanted to use this slide to kind of talk about the Chowder Society as they're introduced in the story.
Hmm.
We meet only 4 of them because we know that one of them has died the previous year. That's Edward Wanderley.
Hmm.
The other member has died. So we meet the 4 of them, and our 2 most main ones are Ricky and Sears, who gets the most attention here in this paragraph. And I love the way they're characterized because it's so fascinating. Like I love the Chowder Society. These are old men. They're men in their 70s, except for Lewis. They're old men. They're they're stuck in their ways, but not entirely. You want to talk about why Ricky Hawthorne survives? I think it's his capacity for change. Ricky
Hmm.
ends the story saying, "We're going on a vacation.
Hmm.
Fuck this town. Fuck Milburn. We're going to France. We've never gone to. I've promised you my whole life that we're going to France. I've never delivered, so we're doing it." I think that's part of the reason why Ricky gets to survive, because these are men that are just stuck in their ways, and they've been living this existence of extreme guilt and horror at what they've done for their entire lives. Their
Yeah,
entire lives. Um,
yeah,
and
Eh,
in their old age, it's finally bursting through.
yeah. And they seem to have like insulated themselves with all of these comforts and
Yeah,
distractions, and
yeah,
like they all sort of have a little like a compulsive thing that they're doing to distract themselves from
hmm,
having to ever face this thing that they did. You could even use the example of the fact that he has this extremely luxurious house here
yeah.
as an example of that.
Well, and I mean, it's really obvious when you go back through the book a second time that this interaction with Ava like scarred them against women for life. Like
Right.
Sears is a bachelor. Lewis had a wife but had a horrible relationship with her. Ricky's relationship with his wife is not the best either. She's like a perpetually cheating on him with every
Yeah.
man in town.
And
and he knows about it.
right.
And John Jaffrey's is like obsessive with people. Like they're just fucked up. And a lot of what they've done in this whole Chowder Society thing is, I think you're right, surround themselves with lavishness. Like they're people tease them for the fact that they still put on fancy dinner jackets to come to this thing. They're diving into this image of formality and properness to hide from the horrible thing that they did, which was related, as we'll learn, to some very carnal sexual desires that were happening. It's so
Yeah.
fascinating.
Right. I'm sure there's going to be more slides on this, but I'm just going to mention it now because we haven't mentioned it yet. But this book has some thoughts about gender, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
There's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of different stuff, and I don't know how it all fits together exactly, and I don't know if we'll figure it out necessarily, but I mean, the one thing that jumps out to you that like I think just almost knocks you over the head is like every time anybody sees we need a name for the ghost. We'll just call it the ghost, I guess. The being, the creature, the main antagonist. There's like a page long description of how like it's almost like r/men writing women, but like intentionally so. Where it's
Yes,
like
yes.
she was the most lavish, sensual being that had ever existed, and her white skin was like a alabaster, and it just goes on and on like that. And it's like it's emphasizing kind of how powerless these men in general are in the face of like what they perceive to be like the perfect woman. And I think the flip side of that is like the ghost realizes like I can play these humans like a fiddle just by making my form look a certain way, basically.
Yeah, and it's responding. She is becoming the woman they think she is, right? Like there's really great stuff when we see Alma in Don's backstory, where he meets her and she's like, I don't know what the scholarly version of the manic pixie dream girl trope would be, but that's
Uh-huh.
basically what she is, right? Where she's just this woman who's so different from anyone he's ever seen, and he's like putting all this stuff on her even though he barely knows her. And like, oh yes, I'm not very good at school, yeah, and it's just like she's just being exactly the type of woman he wants. And then they like go to his brother's house, and he's like this rich, lavish, like basically like these people now,
Hmm.
person. And he's disgusted by this place, and she just molds herself into it because, like, I mean, you can kind of imagine he takes her here and she's just like, oh, this is the type of person he wants. And so she changes, and his reaction to that is complete rejection. It's like,
Hmm.
wait a minute, you're not the person I thought you were. Well,
Hmm.
fuck off then. You disgust me. And like, yes, there's supernatural elements tied into that, but like, one of the things I want to get through here is that it's very easy to look at this book and say it's this woman's fault for everything that happened, but like all these men are putting a lot on this character,
Yeah.
are throwing a lot of their need and desire and understanding of the world and people in it, and just making assumptions. And
Yeah.
so I think it's so cleverly done.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Don is not exactly behaving like a gentleman throughout
No.
that whole first part of the book, or throughout his backstory, right?
Yeah, I
So
mean, you remove the supernatural element from that story, and what happens is he was dating this girl that was this really nice girl,
yeah,
and
really smart.
really smart, and her roommate was very protective of her. And then one day he's walking to class, and a student
Uh-huh.
comes up to him, and she's his dream girl, and he like fucks off and leaves the other girl behind, totally forgets her, falls in head over heels with his dream girl. The first instance of him seeing she's not the girl he thought she was, he just
He,
he blows her off.
yeah,
He just
he blows her off, and then
he dumps her with a
yeah,
note that he pins to her door,
uh-huh,
and then later he finds out his brother is dating her, and he's unhinged and furious, and like
yeah,
remove the supernatural elements
right,
from all this and he's a crazy person.
yeah,
And I think the book is doing that very intentionally. We're jumping ahead a bit here, but I think this is all part of what the story is doing, because I think the same thing happens with the Ava character for all these young men And I have a
Yeah.
whole slide on that, so we'll definitely talk about that. But
Yeah. I mean, I would, not that I think this is, the truth, but I sort of enjoy the reading that, like, actually he's just a crazy person. But David in the chat suggests that the name for the evil being in the story should be Amy.
well, because
So
she
yeah.
always has A. And how long did it take before you realized that there were multiple women in the story that all had a name that started with A and their last name started with M?
I would say that is one thing that I did not take too long to figure out, and it was because like not to make myself seem cool. Like I literally was confused. I was like, wait a second, there was a character who had a similar name. Is that the same character? Was it the same name? And because I was audiobooking, I couldn't look actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that Straub is doing very intentionally with it is that you you don't understand who these people are yet, and so the name sticks out to you as sounding similar to some
Yeah.
other name, and so you log it even, and then you get kind of confused, and that confusion allows it to sit in your brain more, and then you kind of realize what's going on even before the characters did.
Yeah, but I mean, like I thought, they kept talking about the actress, and they'd say the name of the actress, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, is the actress the same woman? And what's funny is she is actually.
Yes.
It's just not in the way that you think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely. All
cool.
right. Let's move in to Sears James's story. It's my turn tonight, Sears said, relaxing as well as he could into Jaffrey's largest armchair and making sure he was facing away from the old galley house. And I want to tell you about a certain events that happened to me when I was a young man experimenting with the profession of teaching in the country around Elmira. I say experimenting because even then, at the beginning of my first year, I had no certainty that I was destined for that profession. I signed a 2-year contract, but I didn't think they could hold me to it if I wanted to leave. Well, one of the most dreadful things in my life happened there. Or it didn't happen, and I imagined it all. But anyhow, it scared the pants off me and eventually made it impossible for me to stay on. This is the worst story I know, and I've kept it locked in my mind for 50 years. You know what a schoolmaster's duties were in those days. This was no urban school, and it was no hill school either. God knows that was where I should have applied. But I had a number of elaborate ideas in those days. I fancied myself a real country Socrates, bringing the light of reason into the wilderness. Wilderness! In those days, the country around Elmira was nearly that, as I remember. But now there isn't even a suburb where the little town was. A freeway cloverleaf was put up right over the site of the school. The whole thing's under concrete. It used to be called Four Forks, and it's gone. But back then, during my sabbatical from Millburn, it was a typical little village, 10 or 12 houses, a general store, a post office, a blacksmith, the schoolhouse. All of those buildings looked alike in a general sort of way. They were all wooden. They hadn't been painted in years, so they all looked a little bit gray and dismal. The schoolhouse was one room, of course, one room for all 8 grades. When I came up for my interview, I was told that I'd be boarding with the Mathers. They'd put it in the lowest bid, and I soon found out why, and that my day would start at 6. I had to chop wood for the schoolhouse stove, get a good fire going, sweep the place out, and get the books in place, pump the water, clean the boards, wash the windows too, when they needed it. Then, at 7:30, the students would come. All right, so this is the first kind of structure break of the book. And I want to point out the really interesting thing that Straub does here. The first paragraph is dialogue, and then the book kind of just effortlessly switches point of view. And
Yeah.
now we're in a first person point of view, as if we've gone into the story. And there's no section break here, there's no chapter break. It just does it. It just moves right into first person point of view.
Yeah, I love this. Again, this is one of the things I loved about the beginning of the book was that a lot of it was these extended, told tales by characters inside the story.
And if I'm being honest, I kind of wish more of it was that. I kind of wish that the structure. I mean, we kind of in a roundabout way we get each of our characters telling a story from their past, right?
Right. Yeah.
But
exactly.
It's not the way you expected it.
No, and I think those are my favorite parts actually. Like this. I mean, this story was one of my favorite parts of the whole book. Sears is telling us this like gothic horror, sort of like southern swamp horror, ghost vampire something. I don't know what label to put on it exactly, but it really it creeped me out. I mean, this is probably one of the parts that creeped me out more than almost anything else actually.
Yeah, I mean we meet 2 of our 3 ghosts here. We meet Fetty and the little boy, and we
Yeah.
meet Gregory, right?
Yeah. Gregory. Yes.
And this, of course, Matt, you might not have recognized this. Some of our listeners might not have recognized this, but Sears is a man named Sears James. There's a man named Henry James who wrote a story called The Turn of the Screw, which is just this story. The Turn of the Screw is a story about a maid who goes to a small village and starts taking care of two children and realizes those two children are being like haunted and possessed by a ghost. That is exactly what the story is. This is just a very thinly veiled homage to the Turn of the Screw. And for those of you, if you maybe haven't read that story, you've possibly seen the Netflix show The Haunting of Bly Manor, which was just James's Turn of the Screw adaptation. And I mean, he named him Sears James. And of course, the other main character in this book is named Hawthorne for Nathaniel Hawthorne, another classic horror story writer. It's hilarious. It's hilarious, and I love it. And I was reading this whole story. I was like, "Fuck, this sounds so familiar," and I couldn't put it together. And then I realized it today when I was prepping for the episode. I was like, "Oh, duh, Sears James, Henry James."
No, I didn't realize it. Although I did have a feeling that I think I was primed on this because we've been covering the Dark Tower, obviously. But I was like, this definitely feels like another sort of subgenre pastiche where he's borrowing sort of genre ideas from specific horror subgenres,
Yes,
and pasting them into his story into this fun patchwork where with of course this thread running through it being that we're being told tales from the past.
Yeah, I actually looked this up after I realized this. Straub said he had, in an earlier version of the story, he had an Edgar Allan Poe story pastiche and then a Nathaniel Hawthorne one as well, and they both ended up getting yanked in editing. He uses Hawthorne, as we'll cover in a couple minutes in part of Don's story. He references Hawthorne, but he doesn't have a character tell a story that's like a Hawthorne story.
It's a shame. I wish they'd left all the stories in.
I agree. But I just it's great. I mean, this is the only slide I pulled for that story. So if you wanted to talk about the experience of Sears here, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is the one part of the book that actually makes you kind of like Sears. Because he's sort of fairly unambiguously heroic. It's just he fails.
Yeah.
And then he takes it hard, and it messes him up for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he flees the whole profession.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I guess no, it's fine. I was gonna say I was confused about like how I am honestly still kind of confused about like the metaphysics of all this. Like okay, so they presumably Anna Mostyn, whatever ghost, like offered Gregory the ability to become a monster, and then they somehow got Finney to also join in, even though it was like against his will. And I was just never sure like who and how and when and where, and part of me is like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be creepy and metaphysical and beyond your understanding.
I wouldn't think about the bargaining and the transactions between ghosts as much. I think it's just the reason why these are ghosts is because they are people from Sears's past, and it's a thing he's never fully dealt with, and reliving the story surfaces them again, and the other evil surrounding the town takes advantage of that surfacing. And that's kind of how, because things start we're told specifically that it's Sears' story here that kind of starts ramping up. He basically resummoned these spirits by remembering them, and it's that moment that Alma takes advantage of them, and things escalate from just the killing of sheep to people.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean,
good point.
Of course, the other thing I had to point out in this one is the very subtle and wonderful little bit, like Sears said, relaxing as well as he could in Jaffrey's largest armchair and making sure he was facing away from the old galley house. Like it's so good. It's so good. Like they like this he says this line like, this is the worst story I know, and I've kept it locked in my mind for 50 years. And you're like, no, it's not, Sears. The worst is, remember when you participated in the murder and cover up of a girl? Like,
Uh-huh.
it's so wild to me that like these whole scary stories started as a way of avoiding the truth that they felt was surfacing. That like, um, their friend dies, and
Yeah.
they kind of know why. I mean, they
Right.
don't fully understand why, but they kind of know why, and they refuse to deal with it. So much to say they can't look at the house, they can't think of it. There's sentences throughout this book that have moments of that night kind of forcing their way into their heads, and they
Yeah.
push them out immediately or completely ignore them.
I think that's my favorite part actually is how often you'll just get a sentence that comes in from out of nowhere
Hmm.
and then it doesn't get and then it's just the next sentence goes back to whatever was happening before and
Yep.
it's like this is an intrusive thought and you understand that they're all trying so hard not to think about this thing. But I mean you're exactly right that like the Chatter Society meetings are literally all of them basically being like we need to talk about this and none of them being willing to talk about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So they're just like, maybe if we just meet regularly, one of us will have the courage to bring it up.
Nope.
And yeah, right. Yeah.
And they're so inept and unable to do that. The only way they bring it up is by literally calling in a third party,
Yeah.
who is a writer of these kind of stories. Like, man, it's stories about stories. It's my shit.
Yeah.
I knew I was gonna love this book as soon as I realized it was just a story about stories and storytelling.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just love that the whole basis of the book basically is like these old men are so emotionally constipated that they can't just like have a conversation about the thing that is obviously the problem
Mm-hmm.
and they all know it.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
it's great.
All right, next
Um,
slide.
cool. So here we have yet another flashback to the party at John Jaffrey's house. The following events occurred a year and a day earlier, on the evening of the last day of the Golden Age. None of them knew it was their Golden Age, nor that it was coming to an end. In fact, they would have seen their lives in the usual fashion of people with comfortable existences, a sufficiency of friends, and the certainty of food on the table, as a process of gradual and even imperceptible improvement. Having survived the crises of youth and the middle years, they thought they had wisdom enough to meet the coming crises of age. Having seen wars, adulteries, compromise, and change, they thought they had seen most everything they would see. They'd make no larger claim. Yet there were things they had not seen, and which they would see in time. It is always true in personal, if not historical terms, that a golden age's defining characteristic is its dailiness, its offered succession of the small satisfactions of daily living. If none in the Chatter Society but Ricky Hawthorne truly appreciated this, in time they would all know it. I suppose we have to go. What? You always liked parties, Stella. I have a funny feeling about this one. Don't you want to meet the actress? My interest in meeting little beauties of 19 was always limited. Edward seems to have become rather taken with her. Oh, Edward. Stella, seated before her mirror and brushing her hair, smiled at Ricky's reflection. I suppose it's worth going just to see Louis Benedict's reaction to Edward's find. Then the smile changed key as the fine muscles beside her mouth moved, became more edged. At least it's something to be invited to. At least it's something to be invited to a Chatter Society evening. It's not, it's a party, Ricky vainly pointed out. I've always thought that women should be allowed during those famous evenings of yours. I know that, Ricky said, and that's why I want to go.
So I pulled these two parts independently for a lot of reasons.
Okay.
The first, again, the first portion of this again breaks the narrative. Like, it breaks the structure of the book, right? Like, this is not something. The narration changes a bit here. Like the following events, like it switches to talking directly to us in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, the way Straub is not nailed down to any particular kind of narrative structure. He changes at will. He goes, like, I love how some of the chapters and the sections have subheadings and some don't. You know, it just kind of does whatever it wants in that regard. They'll switch point of views, they'll switch locations, they'll switch time periods, and he just does whatever he wants here. And it's really interesting to me that he does this, and I think he pulls it off, and it really, to me, helps create a book that feels like an amalgamation of a whole genre of storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right that he pulls it off. It never a single time like intruded on my awareness that he was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But he absolutely is sort of constantly changing the style in which he is framing the story.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
And then the second half here really starts to build on what Stella and Ricky's relationship is, which is not quite a good one. I mean, just like, I don't know. I've only been married like 4 years, but I can't imagine being married to someone for as long as these two have been married, and he's been hiding this core defining secret moment of his life from her this entire time. I mean, like the whole not invited to the Chowder Society thing could just be seen as a metaphor for not letting me in on who you are, because you have this whole side of you that is it's such an important part of you that I am not allowed to be part of at all in any way. You've
Right.
completely locked me from this part of you.
Yeah, he treats it like a big secret too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, I think there's also a thing happening with Stella where she's portrayed as being this like competent, smart woman who none of the men in the story like see as anything other than like, oh, she's so beautiful.
Yeah, they see.
Isn't she beautiful? Yeah. And like in the end, it's not like she makes like a super critical contribution to the plot, but like she does kill one of the like important, you know, zombie creatures, I guess.
Yeah, the Jehovah's Witness monster. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is just a moment where you're like, yeah, I mean, she just kind of reflexively does the correct thing and kills it, where these things have killed so many people.
Yeah.
I think there's something going on with that.
You're so right. I mean, just like in the way that Alma, this description would be seen on a Men Writing Women subreddit, like the way everyone talks about Stella is specifically crafted that they just can't stop talking about how fucking hot she is.
Mm-hmm.
She's 60 years old, but she doesn't look 60. She looks in her 40s, and she looks hot as shit. And everyone wants a piece of her. And Stella is a character that is like, I think has been devalued so much that that's the reason why she's chasing these other men and having these affairs, these meaningless affairs with other men, because that is all that people see in her. That is all the value that they see in her, and we see that specifically because that's all they talk about. That's all they talk about is how fucking hot Stella is. And you're right. Every time we go to her point of view or we see her in action, we understand that she's this hyper competent, intelligent, amazing woman, and no one is appreciating that at all. Yeah. And the sacrifices she's made. Like one of the first things we see about Ricky is that like Stella wanted to go live in New York. She wanted to leave this small town. She wanted to live in New York City. She wanted to get out of here. And Ricky was uninterested in it. Ricky was stuck because of his youth, because of the things he happened that he was never processing, were pulling him and keeping him and grounding him here. And she put up with it. And yes, her way of putting up with that was just to cheat on him with everybody, including his best fucking friend. Like Stella and Lewis had a whole affair.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, which is not to say she's not responsible for the adultery. Of course she is. But yeah, everyone devalues her constantly.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting dynamic there, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. But after talking it over a bit with you here, I think it's something like at least in some sense, is getting back at
Ricky.
At Ricky, and for Ricky's part, he totally knows that she's doing these things, but like it's the same trauma response that instigated this whole thing where he's never ever going to do anything about it because he's like terrified. And it just leads to this like cycle where it's almost like she wants him to do something about it, like anything, like that. It's almost like that's why she's doing this in the first place. I mean, I think part of it is just because she's like bored, but like she does love him, like that is pretty clearly stated as like she loves him. She just wants him to like become a full human being and stop being like this fossilized person who who I think, like you said, he is the only one who's capable of growing,
Mm-hmm.
and he eventually does, but it takes him the whole book basically.
Yeah, it's only just now that I'm realizing the ways which Straub sets up his capability of growth. Like even in this section right here, if none in the Chowder Society but Ricky Hawthorne truly appreciated this, in time they would all know it, right? That like
Mm-hmm.
he, on some level, is more understanding and more aware of things in general
Mm-hmm.
than the rest of them are.
Yeah, right. He I think he appreciates what he has more. And like
Mm-hmm.
that was the interesting thing about the adultery subplot was like he totally knows that she's cheating on him all the time, but he also knows that she does love him,
Mm-hmm.
and so he kind of doesn't care. He's just like I think he like not that he thinks about it explicitly like this, but it's almost like he's like, well, I guess that's what she needs to do,
Mm-hmm.
and but she always comes home to me, and that's all I care about, and
Yeah.
that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. Like that's nothing in the adultery subplot is what I thought it was going to be.
No, no. I
Um,
mean, I expected there to be a confrontation there, and the moment when Stella finally like not comes clean, but like states the thing between them that neither of them were talking about. He's just like, yeah, I know, it's fine, and she's
yeah,
like, I'm done with all that, and he's like, great, good, and they just value each other, and it's like
right.
it's the type of acceptance of that thing without the anger and the brokenheartedness that I think only old people could get to.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it's just like,
right.
yeah, I know,
Yeah,
it's
right.
fine. I've dealt with it.
Yeah. What would be the point of continuing to have this be a thing
Hmm.
when we're probably going to be killed by a ghost in a few days anyway?
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on. We're now moving over to Don Wanderley's journals, in which we spend like a good 100 pages as Don Wanderley kind of um, walks through his past and his encounter with a woman named Alma, who he turned into a book, and then of course the ghost that Alma was took the ideas from the book and then made them real because that's what this story is doing. It's over and over again, Matt. It's their
Hmm.
ghosts are just them. It's just
Hmm.
they're creating them, and none is that more literal in the fact that one of the characters is a writer literally creating a ghost that then it's just a vicious cycle.
Hmm.
But I wanted to talk about this part here, and I'll read it and then we'll get into it. I had found the hook for the Hawthorne lecture. It was an essay by R.P. Blackmer. When every possibility is taken away, then we have sinned. The idea seemed to radiate throughout Hawthorne's work, and I could connect the novels and stories by this black Christianity, by the impulse in them for nightmare, by what was almost the desire for nightmare. For to imagine a nightmare is to put it at one remove, and I found a statement by Hawthorne which helped to explain his method. I have sometimes produced a singular and not unpleasing effect, so far as my own mind was concerned, by imagining a train of incidents in which the spiritual mechanism of the fairy legend should be combined with the characters and manners of everyday life. When I had the ideas which would structure the lecture, the details fell onto the pages of my notebook. This work and my writing students kept me fully occupied for 5 days before the lecture. Helen and I met fleetingly, and I promised her that we could get away for the weekend when my immediate work was done. My brother David owned a cottage in Still Valley outside Mendocino, and he told me to use it whenever I wanted to get away from Berkeley. This was typical of David's thoughtfulness, but a kind of perversity had kept me from using the house. I did not want to have to be grateful to David. After the lecture, I would take Helen to Still Valley and kill two scruples at once. On the morning of the lecture, I reread D.H. Lawrence's chapter about Hawthorne and saw these lines. The first thing she does is seduce him, and the first thing he does is to be seduced, and the second thing they do is hug their sin in secret and gloat over it and try to understand, which is the myth of New England. That was what I had been looking for all along. I put down my cup of coffee and started to restructure my remarks. Lawrence's insight extended my own. I could see all the books in a new way. I discarded paragraphs and wrote in new ones between the crossed-out lines. I forgot to call Helen, as I had promised to do. Hey, so this is just the book right
Okay.
here. This is just the book.
Uh-huh. It's about New England. Is it about the myth of New England?
I have sometimes produced a singular and not unpleasing effect, so as far as my own mind was concerned, by imagining a train of incidents in which the spiritual mechanism of the fairy legend should be combined with the characters and manners of everyday life.
Uh-huh.
That's
So
Ghost Story.
so is that Hawthorne inventing the idea of using genre tropes to examine humanity.
Yes. I mean, inventing, no, but verbalizing, yeah. And
I
that's
mean,
exactly what this book is doing.
yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I love that. That's hilarious. Um,
And the
uh,
first thing she does is seduce him. And the first thing he does is to be seduced. I think that's important because this paragraph is putting it's there you want to blame Alma. You want to blame the ghost. You want to blame the woman for all these things. But
yeah,
the first thing he does is to be seduced, right? There are two,
right.
it takes two to tango in this. And the second thing they do is hug their sin in secret and gloat over it.
Yeah,
And so you are responsible for this, guys. Like it is
yeah,
not just the wily ghost woman that's responsible for these things. This is not the worst thing that's ever happened to you. It is also the worst thing you have ever done.
yeah.
That's the key of this thing.
Right, because you could frame, or I mean, yeah, you could frame this as like the ghost preys on their weaknesses, but the book wants you to confront the idea that like, hey, that is only possible because they have these weaknesses in the first place,
Yep.
and these weaknesses are weaknesses in the sense that they're character flaws. Actually, they are flaws in these men that the ghost finds it easy to exploit
Mm-hmm.
because hey, the men are not what they should be.
Yeah, they're
Uh,
not they're not dealing with those flaws. They're not processing the things
yeah,
that they've done.
they're not growing.
Yeah, exactly. They are old men that are in many ways still the children that didn't know what to do when a woman like danced provocatively in front of them.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's so many examples in this book of like a man basically being like a disgusting creep toward a woman,
Yes.
like the friend of the kid who that he wants to go climb up on the roof of the church and peep
And
at the
yeah,
ghost.
peep on the ghost hoping she gets naked at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean this is dudes being creeps and women striking back by being ghosts.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know if I want to go all the way to the point of saying that like everything that happens in this book is just justice because it's like, well,
Yeah. I mean,
uh,
I think it's just it's not that it's right and just.
mhm.
It's just that it's you have responsibility in it.
Yeah.
You and most of these men are refusing to take that responsibility. Um,
Yes.
like this idea, like that what happens to Dawn here is that this is all her fault. She lied to me. She told me she was someone she wasn't. She told me falsehoods. She manipulated me and used me, and it's her fault that my
Yeah.
next lecture went badly because
Uh-huh.
like, and it's like nah man nah
Yeah.
you have a part to play in this as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I do agree that like Don's story is the one where it's like he just kind of sounds like a massive tool.
Yeah, yeah,
Like he's not a great guy at all. He doesn't even sound like he'd be fun to hang around with. Like he's just a selfish prick actually.
yeah, yeah.
And like all of the stuff that like happens to him is the most obviously like him making dumb choices and mistakes and then
Hmm.
reaping what he sows.
Yeah,
I think out of all of like the backstories, his was the one that gave me the biggest vibe of like this guy kind of sucks actually.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
because like the Sears story, for example, like I felt like Sears, he really did try. He just didn't know what was going on.
Hmm.
He was just out of his depth.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, okay, cool. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
So here, things start to get worse in the town of Milburn. As Don has noted in his journal, while he sat in room 17 of the Archer Hotel and relived his months with Alma Mobley, Freddie Robinson lost his life. And as Don has noted, 3 cows belonging to a dairy farmer named Norbert Clyde had been killed. Mr. Clyde, walking over to his barn on the night of the occurrence, had seen something which scared him so badly that he felt as though the wind were knocked out of him. He ran back to his house and did not dare to come out again until he could see Dawn, when, at any rate, it was again time for chores and he had to go out. His description of the figure he had seen inspired among a very few of the most excitable souls in Melbourne the sort of creature from a flying saucer which John had heard in the drugstore. Both Walt Hardesty and the county farm agent who inspected the dead cows had heard the story, but neither was gullible enough to accept it. Walt Hardesty, as we know, had his own ideas. He had what he considered good reason for assuming that a few more animals would be bled white, and then that would be that. His experience with Sears James and Ricky Hawthorne had made him keep his theory to himself and not share it with the county farm agent, who chose to overlook certain obvious facts and form the conclusion that somewhere in the area an oversized dog had turned killer. He filled a report to this effect and went back to the county seat having completed his business. Elmer Scales, who had heard about Norbert Clyde's cows and was constitutionally half inclined to believe in flying saucers anyhow, sat up 3 nights in a row by his living room window, holding a loaded 12-gauge shotgun across his knees. Come from Mars, boy? Maybe you do, but we'll see how you glow when you got a load of shot in you. He could not possibly have foreseen or understood what he would be doing with that shotgun in 2 months' time. Walt Hardesty, who would have to clean up Elmer's mess, was content to take things easy until the next weirdo happening, and think about how he could get 2 old lawyers to open up to him, them and their friend Mr. Lewis, Snob Benedict. They knew something they weren't telling, and they knew something too about their other old buddy, Dr. John Dope Fiend Jaffrey. They just didn't take that normal, Hardesty told himself as he bedded down in the spare room behind his office. He put a bottle of county fair on the floor beside his cot. No, sir. Mr. Ricky Snob Hawthorne with horns and Mr. Sears and Roebuck Snob James just didn't act normal at all. But Don does not know, so he cannot put in his journal. It's great. A lot of this felt very King to me, actually.
It does. That's kind of half the reason I pulled it. So I mean, multiple times throughout this book, we have this time where Straub kind of breaks away from the close-in point of view with our main characters and kind of just this broad, sweeping, long paragraph describing what's happening in the town of Millburn as we kind of just see it descend more and more into chaos. This is really one of the first ones of those where we like catch everyone up on Millburn is not doing well. And it is King-ish in its fun, little did he know moments. I think the difference between Straub and King is while Straub says he could not possibly have foreseen or understood what he would be doing with that shotgun in 2 months' time, King would have just said he could not possibly believe that he would shoot all his children with that shotgun in 2 months' time. Like Straub like tickles you with the what does that mean, whereas King would just say it. He would just go out and say it.
Right. What's funny is as soon as I read that part, I was like, he's gonna kill his family probably.
yeah, but I mean, Stephen King would definitely just say that. But I mean, I think there's an opportunity, Matt, to kind of talk about the town at large, because we've been very focused on our main characters, obviously, but like the themes are happening all over the place with all these characters. Mm-hmm. We have Walt Hardesty, the sheriff, the drunk sheriff who's like drunk and useless and a fuck up. We have Freddie Robinson, the insurance salesman who's dealing with his own guilt. Everyone in this town sucks.
Yeah, the Freddie Robinson character is such like a sad case.
Yeah.
Where you're like he keeps trying to call to get help. Like he's like, I think I can help you, and then they'll just brush him off. Like I thought that was a great like. I mean, you feel bad for him, but also it's like darkly funny how he totally has all this information, and he's just getting brushed off, and then he's dead.
And then he's dead. Yeah.
But I like the slow escalation of Hardesty's alcoholism, to the point of him just going completely crazy and being locked in his office with a bunch of dead bodies that he swears he can hear like rummaging around in the back.
Man, that shit creeped me out. Like just it was so good. Like when I didn't pull that slide, but when he like goes into the cells and like there is something that really freaks me out in horror is the idea of something moving subtly when you're not looking at it. Like you're scanning over a scene and like that painting has changed slightly, or that stuffed animal has moved slightly, or that like just like the idea that like whenever you're not looking at it, something is moving. That shit freaks me the fuck out. And Straub did such a good job of capturing that like hey, wait a minute, wasn't now the kid's hair's poking above the sheet a little bit? It's so
Uh-huh.
creepy. I
Yeah,
loved
yeah. I
it.
would have sworn that you couldn't see any part of him, and now, yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
good.
No, no, I did love that part. That was a great idea. Yeah, I like that. I like the parenthetical come from Mars, boy. Thought that was great. Um, that and again reminded me of King. Like it felt like there was like more, again more than one King thing here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like a very King thing also to sort of make the town. Uh, a lot of it. I mean, I keep referencing this just because it's one of the few King books that I've read, but it does remind me a bit of Needful Things, where the book is about the implosion of this town, and so you end up learning a lot about all these different townsfolk.
Yeah,
And
and I mean, I think this book came out in '79, and King had already written a few, like Salem's Lot, a story we're going to be
yeah,
covering pretty soon. King had already written that story, so it wasn't that like King read Straub and was like, "Yes, I need to do the small town eats itself thing." But I think
uh-huh.
like Stephen King loves this book. He like we said at the beginning, he calls it one of the best books of the 20th century, horror books. So I think he liked that central idea, and like his enjoyment of this book probably fed to him going back to that well again and
Hmm.
again, because yeah, this is a very King thing. Yeah, the only difference is in a King book it would be in Maine, and we're not in Maine.
Hmm.
What are they? Because like I think in my head, because the story was so Kingish, I kept like mentally putting it in Maine, and then I was like, wait a minute, no, we're not in
But
Maine.
I think New York, right?
I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I forget. It's not. I just know that like, um, I guess I'll just say like until I moved to Colorado, I never really understood snow. And it really helped me that that I do understand snow now when reading this book, because they talk about like these like 15-foot drifts.
Yeah.
And I think before I lived around snow, I would be like, how does that even work? And it's like, okay, well, the snow kind of behaves like sand and piles up in dunes. And then there's other places where it's not where it's not nearly as thick. Um, and but like that's just an aside. Just like
Mm-hmm.
this book, like the part where the winter storms come and the town is covered in snow and people begin dying of cold, and like the whole thing about the snowplow, and like the first snowplow driver is a good snowplow driver, but he is like
He's the town
like
drunk.
the
Yeah.
town drunk, and then he's killed by Sears,
Yeah.
and
Oops.
then he's replaced by the deputy who sucks at snowing at snowplowing. Like I just thought that was a great like I don't know what word to use, like piece of sort of thoughtful use of the setting to tell the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Shiv says the whole setup of the Chowder Society reminded me a lot of Kids the Breathing Method, which he published 3 years after Ghost Story came out. Yeah, that's a Stephen King short story in which a bunch of people gather in a fancy room and tell spooky stories.
Oh, huh?
So I think there's a little bit of a homage there,
Yeah,
Stephen.
sounds fair.
This reminded me that we haven't really talked about. So John Jaffrey like had this horrible. First of all, he was diabetic, and second of all, he was addicted to morphine.
Hmm.
And none of his closest friends knew this.
Hmm.
They didn't know it at all. And again, this shows how these people are like been friends for 50 years. 50 years.
Yeah,
And how much they don't talk about things, they keep things from each other, they're suffering, and they avoid dealing with their suffering. It's
yeah,
like the Chowder Society is like the opposite of therapy.
right.
It's reverse therapy.
Yeah, I mean, my thought during a lot of these parts was like, well, they're not really friends even.
Yeah, they're
Like friends lean on each other and confide in each other, and they're almost just like competing to see who can put up the best front that everything is fine, and they're not, deeply traumatized.
they're trapped together due to this incident, right? It's
Yeah.
like this thing that they did as children bound them together forever, and now
Hmm.
we're getting to see the effect of that 50 years later. It's kind of a cool idea actually, because like this is not the first time someone's written a story about like a thing people did as kids has kind of bound them together.
Hmm.
Stephen King has done that too, but this is one of the only ones I know that we really don't deal with that for as many years as we did. Like we go characters that are like old at the end of their lives, and are still in this place where they're trapped together because of this thing.
Hmm.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a great I don't know if premise is the right word, but it's a great kind of core of the story.
Hmm. We have on the other side of this thing, this next slide though, that I want to talk about. We've
Okay.
talked about age. Let's talk about youth. My father says I'm not supposed to see you much anymore. So what? Do you care? How old are you anyway? 5? Well, he's worried about something. He doesn't look very happy. He doesn't look happy, Jim mimicked. He's old. I mean, what is he, 55? He's got a boring job and an old car, and he's too fat, and his favorite little boy is going to fly out the nest in 9 or 10 months. Just take a look around this town, friend. How many folks do you see with big smiles on their wrinkly old faces? This town is loaded with miserable old suckers. Are you going to let them run your life? Jim leaned back on his bar stool and smiled at Peter, clearly assuming that the old argument was still persuasive. Peter felt himself sinking back into uncertainty and ambiguity. These arguments were persuasive. His father's worries were not his, and the issue had never been that he did not love his father, for he did, but merely whether he should always obey his father's infrequent orders, or as Jim put it, let him run your life. For he had, after all, done anything truly bad with Jim? Because of Jim's keys, they had not even broken into the church. Then they had followed a woman. That was all. Freddie Robinson's death had died, and that was a shame, even if they had not liked him. But nobody was saying that his death had not been natural. He'd had a heart attack, or had fallen down and hurt his head. And there had been no little boy on top of the station, and there had been no little boy sitting on the gravestone. I suppose I should be grateful for your old man let you come out tonight. No, it's not that bad. He just thinks we ought to spend less time together. Not that we shouldn't spend any time at all together. I guess he doesn't like me sitting in places like this. This? What's wrong with this? Hardy gestured comically around the seedy tavern. Hey you, Sunshine, Jim shouted. This is a hell of a place, isn't it? The bartender looked back over his shoulder and grimaced stupidly. Civilized as shit, Lady Jane. The Duke down there agrees with me. I know what your old man is afraid of. He doesn't want you to get in with the wrong crowd. Well, I am the wrong crowd, that's true. But if I am, then so are you. So the worst has already happened, and as long as you're here, you might as well relax and enjoy it. If you wrote down the things Hardy said and looked at them afterwards, you'd find the errors. But just listening to him talk, you'd be convinced of anything. Part of me pulled that whole section just for that last sentence because it's fucking amazing.
I love it. I'm so happy you did pull that. I love this. I love the Jim Hardesty character.
Mm-hmm.
I love his sort of rambling way of speaking. I thought the audiobook did a great job with this. And like it's true, like as you're listening to it, you're like, he just keeps talking and you can't pin him down on anything he's saying.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, and you're like, I feel like I know at least one person who is basically this guy.
Yeah.
I was sad when he died, actually. I was like, he was fun. He brought an energy to things.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it also kind of ties into what we were talking about with the men's treatment of women because he sucks and
yeah, it does suck, but he's fun.
Look at Peter's rationalization. Like, I mean, we didn't even break into church to peep on the woman in her hotel room. That's not anything wrong. And then we just followed a woman at night. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And then we witnessed a man die and didn't tell anything about it. But like, he died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
And maybe if we had been there and like called an ambulance, he would, no. And there had been no little boy sitting on the gravestone. It's just like the ignoring of the ghost is kind of like the ignoring of the problem, the ignoring of the error in your ways of what you're doing. And I don't know, because on the one hand, like you totally get being like, I don't know if you were ever as a kid told by your parents you can't hang out with that person anymore. Because I had people that I knew that my parents did not like me hanging out with because when I hung out with them, I got in trouble. So I found this very relatable. And as a parent now, I can totally understand why you would feel that way. You just look at this person, and it's like, this kid is trouble. And he is. He is.
Yeah. You're a bad influence. And what's funny is that it's absolutely true because Peter is like actually a good, like he's maybe like the best person in the story.
Yeah.
It's just he's young and he's easily swayed
Mm-hmm.
by his dumb friend, um, or maybe his really smart friend actually, because it seems like Jim can be like really really successfully manipulative
Yeah.
and it is actually good at that game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and Peter does like lure him, lead him into the house where
My
he
God.
himself is killed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. I thought, like, I was trying to think this through before because I was like, it's kind of like what I said earlier, where I'm like, why are Ricky and Peter like two of the very few people who get to live, and like, why does Don want to they get to live? Like what? Why do they deserve that, and all these other people don't?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like, and because none of them are perfect, obviously. We just talked about how Don really doesn't come off well in his backstory.
Yeah.
Peter is like very easily taken in by Jim and does a bunch of stupid stuff because Jim like makes fun of him basically,
Yeah.
like very weak sauce. And then Ricky, I mean, he's too much to go into really
Yeah.
because he's such a central character.
Yeah.
But like I think like just talking about Peter specifically, like he still does have this like bravery, and like it's like he has a good heart. He's just easily swayed, and he's young, and like not dumb in the sense of unintelligent, but just like not worldly,
Yeah.
and doesn't know what he's doing. And so you can allow yourself to forgive him at least that far, and then when he gets the chance to do the right thing, he does. And I think that's maybe what counts for so much.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can see Peter becoming like everyone else in this town one day if he
Hmm.
makes bad decisions. Like, I mean, Jim's quote here: "The worst has already happened, and as long as you're here, you might as well relax and enjoy it."
Hmm.
That's what the Chowder Society is doing, right? Like,
Mm.
we've already done it. We've already done it. The worst has happened. Why deal with it? Why like
Yeah.
it's already happened. It's water under the bridge. Why deal with it? And that's what everyone in this town is doing. And so you can see Jim. That's his whole thing. He gets sucked into that and is killed for it. But Peter is always kind of uncertain and always kind of resisting that. And it is his interactions with two people that are coming to terms with this much later in their lives that allow him to kind of turn away from that road and into a successful road. And that's great. I love it.
Yeah, I like the idea that like he barely escapes with his life after making one mistake, and then he sees these old men, and he's like, "Oh God, I don't want to end up like that." And
Yeah.
then that's
Yeah.
enough to cause him to right his path.
Yeah. Love it.
Cool. Um, and his mom gets killed too.
Yeah. His
All right.
adulterous mom.
His adulterous mom but he escapes. He figures it out. He figures out the secret of the ghosts. All right, shall I move on to
Secret of the ghosts is you stab them.
you stab them? You don't do what they say, and then you stab them. Basically, I mean that is basically it.
Yes.
So here we have our Playboy being haunted. The kitchen was empty, but not undisturbed. Signs of occupation and activity lay everywhere. Two plates were laid out on the kitchen table, his best china. Polished silver had been set beside the plates. Two candles, not lighted, stood in silver holders near the plates. A can of frozen orange juice had been set out before his blender. Lewis turned on the stove. Empty pans sat atop unlighted burners. The smell of cooking was overwhelming. His kettle whistled, and he turned it off. Two slices of bread had been placed beside the toaster. Christina? He called, thinking, not very rationally, that it might still be a practical joke. There was no answer. He turned back to the stove and sniffed the air over the pans. Bacon. Eggs and butter. Superstitiously, he touched the cold iron. The dining room was just as he had left it, and when he went into the living room, that too was undisturbed. He picked up a book on the arm of a chair and looked at it quizzically, though he had put it there the night before. He stood in the living room for a moment, here where no one had come, smelling a breakfast no one had cooked, as if the room were a refuge. Christina? He called again. Anybody? Upstairs, a familiar door clicked shut. Hello? Lewis moved to the base of the stairs and looked up. Who's there? Sunlight drifted in from a window on the landing. He saw dust motes spinning lazily above the stairs. The house was noiseless. For the first time in its vast size seemed a threat. Lewis cleared his throat. Who's there? After a long moment, he began to climb the stairs. When he reached the landing, he looked out of the little window set in its casement, sunlight dripping trees, and he continued on to the top. Here the hallway was light, silent, empty. Lewis's bedroom was on the right, 2 old rooms with the adjoining wall removed. One of the old doors had been sealed off, the other replaced with an elaborately grained slab of monkey wood hand-fashioned into a door. With its heavy brass knob, Lewis's bedroom door closed with a distinctively chunky sound, and that was the sound he had heard.
Then there's a warm presence on the bed.
Yep.
So I pulled this because this spooked the shit out of me. This is one of the scenes that spooked the absolute shit out of me. Like, just the idea of, like, this ghost came in and laid everything for breakfast.
Uh-huh.
And then, like, it's all like eggs and butter. Like,
yeah,
it's all there. It's
yeah.
made.
No, the time spent on this kind of thing is I think yet again it's the dread, it's the build up, it's the what the hell is happening, and like he takes his time, right? I this is a whole like page basically, and it's like what happens in this. He sees that there's plates laid out in the kitchen and that there was cooking, and then he goes up the stairs. But I love that Straub takes his time with this stuff.
Yeah, it's great. And I mean, this happens to Lewis again and again throughout the story, right? We had the moment where he's jogging through the forest and he feels like someone's chasing after him, which I don't know. I've felt that way before. Like, that you're just absolutely 100% convinced someone is behind you. And now, yeah, he comes back and he smells breakfast, but there's no breakfast, but there is breakfast. Like, it's just so good. And I mean, we haven't talked much about, he's, unlike the rest of the society, he's kind of reeling from 2 horrible incidents, right? The incident that all of the rest of them are, and also his wife's death.
Which was also connected to the ghost, right?
Yes. So. We're going to get there, actually, in the next slide. But I find he's a really interesting character because, like, Lewis is the one we'll learn that Ava hit on first, right? He's the youngest and the one that like went to him first, and he's not the one that pushed her away, right? Or is he? I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I think he might have been. So he's like doubly fucked up, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love, like, again, to take the metaphor of the ghosts, he had this horrible event happen with his wife. He's not dealing with it. The way he deals with it is to just become a playboy who is doing like he's sleeping around, but also having long-term affairs with older women. Like he's fucking like 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
And also like being an adulterer with all the married women in town.
Yeah. Like he's fucking the 20-year-olds as a cover for his long-term affairs.
Yeah. And I mean, 20 is conservative, the way the book seemed. Like, he's 60. That guy dude has to look really great, but he's really, really into extremely young women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do make the point that he's like super handsome though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's the handsome one.
But still 60?
Yeah. No, he's just so handsome though.
So handsome.
Just so handsome.
So handsome.
Yeah, I mean, the book does have a weird thing where it talks about like these people in their 60s being like, but they were just as beautiful as ever. And you're like, really? Okay.
I wonder if part of that is for the specific reason, like we were talking about, that they are still in many ways children who have never truly grown up.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe so. I like that. That's a good idea. That he of all of them, he is the most in a state of arrested development. That's why he's so handsome. He's never changed. He's Peter Pan.
Yeah. All right, let's see Peter Pan meet his end.
Okay.
So this next part is happening when Lewis has this encounter and then like calls his friend and goes out to hunt, because obviously when you've seen a ghost, the thing you need to do is go fucking shoot some animals. So he goes out into a hunt and finds a door in a tree and is basically just in this long illusion that ends up killing him. Lewis looked at his father's rigid back. "I'll see to it now." His father made no answer. "Goodbye." His father spoke without turning around. "You never listened, but mark me, son, it will come back to haunt you. You were seduced by yourself, Lewis. Nothing sadder can be said of any man. A handsome face and feathers for brains. You got your looks from your mother's Uncle Leo, and when he was 25, he stuck his hand into the wood stove and held it there until it was charred like a hickory log. Lewis went through the door to the dining room. Linda was peeling the sheet off her naked body in the vacant upper room. She smiled at him with bloody teeth. After that, she said, your mother's Uncle Leo was a godly man all his life long. Her eyes glowed, and she swung her legs down off the bed. Lewis backed away towards the bare wooden wall. After that, he saw scripture and spiderwebs, Lewis. She moved slowly toward him, twisting on a broken hip. You were going to put me in the pond. Did you see scripture in the pond, Lewis? Or were you distracted by your pretty face? Now it's over, isn't it? Lewis asked. Yes. She was close enough for him to catch the dark brown smell of death. Lewis straightened his body against the rough wall. What did you see in that girl's bedroom? I saw you, Lewis. What you were supposed to see. Like this.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. So going back to our metaphor, though, I think this is brilliant because, so a thing happens to Lewis when he's a kid, right? And it haunts him his entire life. He does this terrible thing. And it haunts him his entire life, and he refuses to accept it. He refuses to get over it. Eventually, this thing resurfaces. And what happens? Does it kill him? No, it kills his wife. It destroys his wife because he's not dealing with it, and it is destroying all the people around him. Not him, the people around him. I saw you, Lewis, what you were supposed to see. This is what you're supposed to be dealing with. The truth of what you did, the ghost that you created that day is something you were supposed to be dealing with, but you're not. I went up, I got up, I walked into the room, and I am suffering the consequences for your actions.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, because the ghost came for him, and it was because he, I guess, do we say he was too cowardly or just a coincidence? But in either case, he didn't face the ghost then either.
I mean, he makes it seem like I think that the thing is that there's Alma is there, right? And no, it's Alma's mother. Alma, that other ghost is there with a young Alma in a different version, and she's crying in the bedroom, and she gets up to get it, and she could have but didn't. Probably because she reminds him of Ava. Of course she does.
And he's instead of using this as an opportunity to maybe sort of in some small way make amends, he avoids it still. And loses his wife. I do like this idea, obviously metaphoricalizing the idea of the traumatic thing and internalizing it, and then it destroying everyone around them. It destroys their families. It destroys the whole town. It kills. It just kind of randomly kills people, and it's because they refuse to face it. I mean, so if, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's not like it would have been good for Lewis if he had gone into that room, though. It just would have been like, would he have finally faced what he had done, or is it kind of too late for him to face what he's done? Is that the point?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to. My fear is that we literalize the metaphor too much, and like it's just a symbol of his inability to face the consequences. And to face the thing he did. I don't know. Like, what happens if Lewis goes in that room? Maybe he dies, and then that's the end. And he stops infecting the people around him. Which Lewis kills indirectly a lot of people in this story. Yeah. Like, but Peter's mother dies because of Lewis.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. I mean, it's like the implication here, at least, is like, what is inside of Lewis is so horrible that it drives his wife insane immediately, which is kind of dark.
Yeah, I mean, if Alma is the spiritual manifestation of the act that he did, then these people are seeing the horror of the terrible thing that they did.
Yeah.
Speaking of that terrible thing, it's time to learn about it.
Right. If we're as with the book, more than halfway through and only finally now learning this. Yes. All right. So here are the remaining members of the Chatter Society. finally reveal their secret, what happened to Eva Galley. We were speechless, Sears said. There was our unattainable goddess, cursing like a sailor and raging, acting like a whore. Madder music and stronger wine. That's what we got, all right. Edward had a little gramophone and some records, and she made us crank it up and put on the loudest jazz he had. She was so vehement. It was crazy. We'd never seen any woman act that way. And for us, she was, sort of a cross between the Statue of Liberty and Mary Pickford. Dance with me, you little toad, she said to John, and he was so frightened by her that he scarcely dared touch her. Her eyes were just blazing. I think what she felt was hate, Ricky said. For us, for the town, for Stringer. But it was hatred, and it was boiling, a cyclone of hate. She kissed Lewis while they were dancing, and he jumped back like she burned him. He dropped his arms, and she spun off to Edward and grabbed him and made him dance. Her face was terrible, rigid. Edward was always more worldly than the rest of us, but he too was shaken by Eva's wildness. Our paradise was crumbling all around us, and she kicked it into powder with every step, with every glance. She did seem like a devil, like something possessed. You know how when a woman gets angry, really angry, she can reach way back into herself and find rage enough to blow any man to pieces? How all that feeling comes out and hits you like a truck? It was like that. Aren't you little sissies going to drink? She said. So we drank. It was unspeakable, Sears said. She seemed twice our size. I think I knew what was coming. There was only one thing that could be coming. We were simply too immature to know how to handle it. I don't know if I saw it coming, but it came anyhow, Ricky said. She tried to seduce Lewis. He was the worst possible choice, Sears said. Lewis was only a boy. He may have kissed a gal before that night, but he certainly had done no more than that. We all loved Eva, but Lewis probably loved her most. He was the one who found that Dowson poem, remember, and because he loved her most, her performance that night and her hatred stunned him. And she knew it, Ricky said. She was delighted. It pleased her that Lewis was so shocked he could scarcely utter a word. And when she pushed Edward away and went after Lewis, Lewis was frozen stiff with horror, as if he had seen his mother begin to act that way. So she's dancing around and swearing.
Yeah,
and
she's drinking and swearing and dancing.
Listening to jazz, listening to loud jazz music.
Yeah, what a fucking monster, right?
Yeah, I think that they should kill her.
Yeah, definitely. They should definitely kill her for this.
They should kill her and put her body in the swamp. She deserves it for dancing and being mad that something bad happened.
Yeah, her fiance lost his arms.
Uh-huh.
His arms got chopped off.
And then he died, right?
I don't think he died till later.
Oh, okay. I thought he bled out actually, but I don't remember.
Maybe. You might be right. And she is like, oh shit, I'm gonna be stuck in this town forever and I'm miserable, and here's these boys who worship the ground I walk on for some fucking weird reason, and I'm miserable and drunk, and so they're gonna kill me. Yeah, because she stopped being the person they wanted her to be, or they thought she was, the image of the person they built up in their stupid little immature boy heads.
It's so hilariously, I mean, yes, misogynistic, but just like dumb.
Yeah.
Like the stuff that they say even as old men, where they're like you know how, let me find, you know how when a woman gets angry, really angry, she can reach back and, okay, it's just a person.
Yeah.
Let's do you think women have like a magic power?
Yeah, they have magic anger powers. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, they can reach back into the anger zone, and then they get twice as big.
Yeah.
And then they can make you do things.
I mean, here's the thing. These men are all in their 20s, right?
Right.
They want to, the way they're telling the story makes it seem like they're like 13 years old. Yeah. But they're all men in their 20s. She's a woman in her like mid to late 20s, and she's probably all of like 140 pounds.
Right.
And like we already know Sears is built like a truck. Even when he was younger, like the line, she seemed twice our size, it's just like, that's why I laughed, because it's just like, come on, there are 5 of you, and this is this little woman, like, God, you guys suck. Yeah.
She's like you said, and like you pointed out a couple times, and she's just violating their expectations. She's just being a human being, a complex human being, not a perfect. I mean, that's the problem is that they saw her as a cross between the Statue of Liberty and Mary Pickford, as they say. that is an insane thing to say.
Yes.
Like I think that's one thing. Maybe one thing that is causing me to like fail to fully unlock the story is that it doesn't seem like they ever actually realize like, hey, when you murdered the woman and buried her body in the lake, that was kind of fucked up. Like maybe like because it seems like they're like, yeah, and then like we saw her get up, and then like because it was supernatural, she was probably a monster the whole time, and it wasn't actually that bad what we did because she was a monster.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? They basically make the decision that this woman has always been this monster, right? That
Hmm.
she has been this monster for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the monster itself kind of agrees with that sentiment.
Hmm.
But like if we're looking at the way our naming conventions work, her name is not Anne some M something.
Mostin
Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
it doesn't follow that trend. Her name is Ava Galley.
Hmm.
So what if this was just a woman?
Yeah.
and they created this monster, this ghost, when they killed her. That
Right.
like this moment of, oh my god, she blinked, she moved as the like that's you creating this thing.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah. Maybe it's their fear that takes on a life of its own.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, both metaphorically and literally, and they give birth to the ghost.
I wish I could find a good enough reason for why the AM names though. Like, you know, I if anyone knows that, I'd be interested to hear about it because like why like it would be really interesting if she picked this name for a very specific reason for them, and I don't think she did.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting because Eva, I think maybe I thought it was Ava Galley, but no, it's Eva Galley. It's not even close to being an AM name.
Mm-hmm.
So I like this idea a lot that it's like this was just a this was just a person
Mm-hmm.
who they killed, and then the supernatural force of the universe sort of came to get revenge, or you
Yeah.
could say her ghost, or I mean, so Sears's story happens after this, right?
Correct. Yes.
So Sears. So I'm just trying to think through whether there's any reference to any of the any of the AM personas happening um prior to them murdering Eva Galley.
No. No.
So I think it works perfectly well to say that it is literally just the ghost of the woman they killed.
Yeah. I mean, they do say
Yeah.
in the story that like they think that like the reason Stringer lost his arms in the Combine
Uh-huh.
is because of her magic spooky,
Uh-huh.
but also the mentions that like the harvest was really rough that year. They were working longer hours than they needed to get it done in time, and he probably just like lost focus and
Uh-huh.
had an accident with a very dangerous machine that happens all the damn time. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I do, to your earlier point, it is interesting that I do not remember there being a time in the book where it specifically has our surviving Chowder member Ricky say like, I have now realized that that was a really fucked up thing that we did, and
Uh-huh.
and I cannot push all my blame off onto this metaphysical force.
Yeah.
I don't think that happens. I think you're right.
Because when they're telling this story, they totally are taking the tone of like a supernatural being was among us,
Yeah.
and we understandably freaked out,
Hmm.
and it wasn't our fault that we killed her, and then the only reasonable thing to do was to steal someone's car to use to then ditch it in the lake.
Yeah, and then of course heir shoots all his children because they stole his car, which is
Uh-huh.
just again how their action ripples out and destroys everyone around them. Yeah, you're right, and I mean when they start this, I think it's Sears that when they start the story is like, what we did wasn't even murder, and we
Uh-huh.
probably wouldn't have even been convicted of it. But like it would have been real bad for our reputations.
Yeah.
Like I
Right. It
wouldn't
would
have
have
been
gone.
able to be a lawyer
Uh-huh.
anymore.
Right.
And that's no fair.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have gone on my permanent record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're right. but it's I guess it surprises me still that the book never really says that. And
Yeah.
maybe if it had said that, I would be complaining because it was too on the nose and obvious. So
Well, the thing that I've kind of been avoiding talking about because I don't know how to get there is how how does the end of the book fit within everything that we've been talking about? You know,
mhm.
Don's destruction of this little girl who turns into a wasp. We've got a whole slide for it. We're going to talk about it, but just I'm just going to preface that now and we can kind of circle back around till we get it because I'm not sure I see the through line there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, maybe we should just think about it and then we'll talk about it when we get there.
Sure, sure. All right, let's move on to this next scene. This is when our new Chowder Society, which consists of Peter, Don, and Ricky, confronts the ghosts inside an old movie theater. Alma, Don managed to say. Bates' ivory face flickered. Yes, you're Alma, and your brother's Alma. Mustn't forget, David. Not nearly as entertaining as you. Entertaining? Oh, yes, we enjoy entertainment. Only proper since we have provided so much of it. Now look at me again, Donald. He reached down to pull Don up from the floor, smiling coldly. Peter groaned, pulled himself clear. Don looked confusedly across at him and saw that Fenny was also moving, rolling over, his smudgy face a soundless, screaming grimace. They hurt Fenny, Don said, blinking, and saw Bates' hand slowly reaching towards him. He shot his leg out and squirmed away from Bates, moving faster than he had ever had in his life. Don rolled to his feet halfway between Gregory and Peter, who was live forever, blinking at the squirming, grimacing form of Fenny Bate. They hurt Fenny, Don said, the meaning of Fenny's agony going through him like an electric current, the giant sounds of the film opening up again in his ears. You don't, he said to Bate and looked under the seats. His axe lay out of reach. Don't? You don't live forever. We live much longer than you, Bates said, and the civilized veneer of his voice cracked open to reveal the violence beneath it. Don backed towards Peter, looking not at Bates' eyes, but at his mouth. You won't live another minute, Bates said, and took a step forward. Peter, Don said, and looked over his shoulder at the boy. Peter was holding the bowie knife above Fenny's writhing body. Do it, Don shouted, and Peter brought the knife down into Fenny's chest. Something white and foul exploded upwards, a reeking geyser from Fenny's ribcage. This is our big action sequence here.
This was a pretty cool scene.
It was.
Happening in the movie theater with like a zombie movie playing.
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead is playing in the background as they fight undead.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very good. Very, very good.
Yeah, yeah, and you know he does a good job conveying the physicality of these two, whatever they are, creatures, and how dangerous they are.
Mhm.
But it also makes it believable that they could beat them the way they do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very fun. It's very good. It's very tense.
I didn't have
I
much
love-
else to say about it except for I love it because it's
Yeah.
in a movie theater.
We haven't talked much about like Bate, the character.
Gregory.
Gregory. The audiobook reader does just such a good voice for Gregory Bate. But he's scary. I like him. He's scary. The way he's portrayed is like having this like extremely cultured way of speaking, but he's like basically like a rabid wolf underneath. It's a very fun sort of antagonist. Even if he's not the main antagonist, he's a very fun sort of antagonist.
Yeah, and his poor little brother Fenny Bate, who just is totally taken by his brother, and
Yeah, that's a whole thing that I don't know what to do with. By the way, like the idea that Finney like is just this poor victimized kid who is like sucked into hell by his brother, and is now like just his sort of co-revenant who does his bidding. Like it's like they like on the thematic level. I mean on the plot level, I get it perfectly. It's like, oh, that's cool and scary and fucked up. But on the thematic level, I don't know what the hell's going on.
I mean, it could just be another like it's generational trauma. Can we remember how did Gregory Bate die? I don't remember.
It fell off the ladder, right?
Oh yes.
And it was unclear whether the other kids had killed him or not.
But he was kind of a monster even before that, wasn't he?
Oh,
like,
yes.
Yeah, he was abusing his.
Yeah, he was abusing his brother,
Yeah.
which was why everyone was like, because everyone was provincial and awful. They held this against little brother.
Yeah.
And then the younger kids may have killed Gregory, by pushing him off the ladder. Maybe not. We're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the way the ghost the way this works is like people refusing to look at things, right?
Yeah.
So you could say that the sort of the whole culture's inability to like healthily deal with what had happened to this poor boy caused him to become a vengeful revenant who
Yeah.
got his revenge on them 100 times over.
Seems like it.
Okay, we figured it out. Good.
There we go. We did it.
All right.
All right.
Next, here we have Alma Mosley throws illusions at our characters to try to stop them as they come after her.
Yeah, this is the climax of the story.
Yeah. Now look at me and tell me I'm dead, David said. You're not dead. David sighed happily. Okay, good. You had me worried there, pal. Now, do you remember anything about what happened? No. A hospital? You had about the worst breakdown anybody's ever seen, brother. It was the next thing to a one-way ticket. Happened right after you finished that book. The Night Watcher? What else? You just blanked out. And when you'd say anything, it was just crazy stuff about me being dead and Alma being something awful and mysterious. You were in outer space. If you don't remember any of this, it's because of the shock treatments. Now we have to get you settled again. I talked to Professor Lieberman, and he says he'll give you another appointment in the fall. He really liked you, Don. Lieberman? No, he said I was... That was before he knew how sick you were. Anyhow, I got you out of Mexico and put you in a private hospital in Riversdale. Paid all the bills and got you straightened out. Steak will be here in a minute. Better get that martini down. The house red isn't bad here. Don obediently sipped at his drink. That familiar, cold, potent taste. Why am I so cold? He asked David. I'm frozen. After effect of the drug therapy, David patted his hand. They told me you'd feel like that for a day or two. Cold, not too sure yourself yet. It'll go away, I promise you. A waitress came with their food. Don let her take away his martini glass. You had all these disturbed ideas, his brother was saying. Now that you're well again, they'll shock you. You thought my wife was some kind of monster who had killed me in Amsterdam. You were convinced of it. The doctor said you couldn't face the fact that you'd lost her. That's why you never came out here to talk about it. You wound up thinking that what you wrote in your novel was real. After you mailed the book off to your agent, you just sat in a hotel room, not eating, not washing. You didn't even get up to shit. I had to go all the way down to Mexico to bring you back. What was I doing an hour ago? Don asked. You were getting a sedative shot. Then they put you in a cab and sent you down here. I thought you'd like to see this place again. Something familiar.
So I wanted to talk like the final like thing that Alma throws at them is an illusion for each of the three of them, right?
Yeah.
I thought we'd start with Don's because he's kind of the main character, but also we've talked about this on other shows before, but I am just so here for the gaslighting-esque, like, no, you've actually been crazy this whole time. Like, we've talked about this. There's an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in which she, like, wakes up in a mental institution and is told the entire events of the past 6 seasons of the show have all been in her head, and she's actually just crazy.
Uh-huh.
And it's such a fun idea, especially in that episode of the show where, like, obviously you know that's not the truth, but the show does such a good job of getting you to maybe doubt it and go, well, hold on, maybe it is the truth. And so I'm just here for this kind of plot line. I think it's so fascinating to do that. It's like, no, all that you've imagined this whole thing the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because for me, this part kind of played out just long enough that for a second I was like, man, that would be a really interesting twist.
Yeah,
actually.
That would certainly be a curveball. Yes.
But then what happens is like he keeps asking questions that make too much sense, and then his brother keeps doing the like ad-libbed confabulation thing, and you're like, okay, Anna is running out of ideas.
Yes.
And eventually, and also the fact that she I forget which character this starts with, but she starts the voice of the person in the hallucination starts being like, you just didn't understand that the creature that you were fighting was just so far beyond you and so much more amazing and awesome.
Yeah. I
And
think it happens in all three of them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So we have Peter who like successfully rejects Jim, right? He sees Jim and then doesn't believe Jim's there. And then it's his mom. and then he almost succumbs to his mom. Like there's a second there where you really think is like, no, no, Peter, no.
Yeah.
And isn't it that Ricky sneezes because he has a cold? Is what like the sound that breaks through that kind of breaks the spell.
Yeah.
I think that's so hilarious. I don't know what it's supposed to mean though.
Yeah, I mean, I took it as I didn't take it as meaning too much beyond like like from their point of view, it's like she has this immense power over them, and but like in reality, it's almost like she's desperately trying to keep them at bay using these hallucinations, which are really very like thin and easily broken hallucinations if you just have like the mental fortitude for it. And the slightest thing is what cracks through, which is interesting because it kind of goes in with this thing we've been talking about the whole time, where it's like she's actually way more like vulnerable and sort of pitiful than they think of her as being.
What does Ricky see again? I can't remember. I think he sees
Sears. Yeah. He's in the Chowder Society meeting, and it's like they tell him he fell asleep in the middle of telling a story or whatever.
Oh yeah. So that's kind of, I mean, thinking back to like, what is Ricky rejecting this lie they've built up around themselves? Him rejecting the Chowder Society is trying to get him back to like, oh, this is just a story. It's just a story. Let's not focus on. So his rejecting of that is kind of sort of a subtextual. No, what we did was bad. If the Chowder Society is a symbol of deflecting the truth, then his rejection of them is, I guess we could say, is his acceptance of what he did. If you squint.
Yeah. If you squint, sure. I like that. I'll give you like style points for that, but I don't know.
I don't know if it's perfect. I think if we had a complaint that I wish Straub had drawn that a little clearer,
Because I mean, part of me, like we've been talking about this for 2 hours now, and part of me is still not entirely sure that we're like right that we're supposed to think that these men are all like somewhat monstrous buffoons.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was just the 70s and Peter Straub's kind of sexist.
Yeah, right. Like this is actually just a story about how women are kind of like a monstrous supernatural ghost who will suck your soul out. And
I really don't think so. I really don't.
Like I really like hope not. And like there's so much in here that makes that not seem to fit.
Yeah.
There's really so much in here where it's like the, you know, all of the times where men are just like act like fools and do stupid things, and the whole character of Jim Hardesty is like a perfect example of like toxic masculinity, right? So,
sure. Oh yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I am not 100% sure that our combined read is 100% correct, but I feel like that part of it at least is yes, this is what the book's doing, because it would be so weird otherwise.
Yeah, you know, let us know, folks. Let us know if you find evidence that no, it's exactly as it appears on the page.
Stephen King is a bigger appreciator of stories than me, and I refuse to believe he would just read a story that is just that and go, yeah, that checks out.
This is genius. This is a genius portrayal of how awful women are.
Yeah, women do have that secret reserve of anger that they can tap.
Yeah, but only women.
Only women. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the back. It's in the back of their head.
Oh gosh. All right. So they've defeated Alma, but she never goes forever, right? Because you got to shoot the lynx. And so the book here ends with Don. Everyone else leaves Milburn. Ricky gets away. He goes on vacation with his wife. Peter goes to school, but Don stays behind to hunt for Alma's return. And that was how he found her. At first, he was doubtful, watching the girl who had appeared at the playground one afternoon. She was not beautiful, not even attractive. She was dark and intense, and her clothes never seemed to be clean. Side note, she's not beautiful because she's a child. You're not supposed to be attracted to a child, Don. The other children avoided her, but children often did that, and her air of separation from them, swinging herself in lonely arcs or bouncing up and down on an otherwise empty teeter-totter, could have been a resilient child's defense against rejection. But perhaps children were quicker at seeing real differences than adults. He knew he would have to make up his mind quickly. His account had shrunk to $125. But if he took the girl away, and he was wrong, what was he? A maniac? He started wearing the Bowie knife strapped to his side beneath his shirt when he went to the playground. Even if he was right, and the girl Ricky's links, she could stick to her role. If he took her away, she could damage him irreparably by not revealing anything and waiting for the police to find them. But the Night Watcher wanted them dead. If he was right, he did not think she would let the police and the legal system punish him for her. She liked gaudier conclusions than that. She seemed to have taken no notice of him, but the child began to appear in his dreams, sitting off to one side, observing him expressionlessly. And he imagined that even when she was sitting on a swing, seemingly absorbed, she peeked at him. If he did not act, he knew one day he would not be able to leave his bed. His indecision would spin back into every atom of his life. It would paralyze him. This time he would not be able to write his way out of it. One morning he motioned to another of the children, and the little boy shyly came up to him. "What's the name of that girl?" he asked, pointing. The boy shuffled his feet, blinked, and said, "Angie." "Angie what?" "Don't know." "Why doesn't anyone ever play with her?" The boy squinted at him, cocking his head, then, deciding that he could be trusted, leaned forward charmingly, cupped his hands behind his mouth to tell a dark secret. "Because she's awful." He scampered away, and the girl swung back and forth, higher and higher, uncaring. All right, Matt, it's time to crack this noodle.
I think I might need to reread this book, Scott.
I mean, so it's interesting, right? So they've defeated this thing, but they can't defeat it forever because if it's a metaphor for the mistakes of your past, for the damage you do, the trauma you inflict, it never can truly go away.
Mm-hmm.
So
you just got to murder a little girl.
Part of me kind of wishes that the book didn't definitively say that, yes, this was her. And like the book ends on the uncertainty of him sitting on a bed, not knowing if this girl that he's now kidnapped is indeed the person. But that's a depressing ending. But
I mean, I agree though, because like there's so much in here where it's like, well, are we okay? So like let me get real nerdy for a second. Like are we saying that a girl was born to a pair of parents who died, and then the child was fostered by this other group of people who were sort of negligent, and then the ghost possesses the child?
Maybe.
Or does the ghost just sort of like recoalesce into the child and like insert itself into this foster family situation magically?
That was my read, because if it is truly Alma, I don't like Alma just created herself. Right? Like,
I mean, seemingly, but like, then why does she need to recoalesce as a child at all? Why can't she recoalesce as another 20-something woman where she's kind of at the height of her power and can do whatever she wants? That's why I'm like, is this just like a little girl who is sort of either metaphysically possessed or sort of like has the potential to become an Alma Mobley? But like, obviously, because if you take it as just like this is like a real child who's been possessed, then it's like, well, they're a terribly unfortunate child. Like this is just sad. This is just terribly sad. And if it's just like a supernatural manifestation, I guess, then it's like then other things. I'm just like, okay, but why is she even at a playground? Like what? Like why would she do this? Why does she get? I don't know, man. There's a lot of stuff where you get that you're not supposed to be thinking too hard about certain things, because it's like, look, it's magic, okay? It's just magic. It's just magic. But then when you think about it later, and you're like, well, I need to be able to figure out what certain things mean, and that makes it hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially frustrating for me when I feel like I have such a good handle on what the story is doing. except for this part, which is arguably the most important part.
Yeah, because I think just to continue on what you were saying a second ago, like if you say that the the ghost is the symbol of repressed and unaddressed trauma, is this basically supposed to be saying that um like you could say that like Ricky and Peter um successfully face their trauma
Mm-hmm.
when they stab her and they're done, but Don is not done yet. He needs to he needs to face his own trauma separately,
Yes.
and then he does this thing, and that's
Then why a little girl?
it, it feels very wobbly to me. Is and then it's like, well, then why wasn't it enough for him to just help them kill her in the house?
Yeah, I mean, because this portion of the book, Don has kind of gone unhinged, right? Like
Yeah.
he's sticking around the town. He has no job. He's not writing. He's running out of money. He like starts going to the playground obsessively to the point that like a newspaper reporter writes a story about him, the weird
Mhm.
guy that hangs out in the park all the time.
Uh-huh.
Like it's not healthy behavior. And I'm I don't think it's like your reward for this extremely unhealthy behavior is you finally get to defeat your trauma. I don't know. I mean, and it's interesting that the boy's reaction to her is just wonderful, right? That like this idea that maybe they're not even fucking with if Alma is this like horrible depiction of a men's view of femininity and their obsession with femininity, and they always are completely allured and attracted to it and until it stops being what they want it to be, and then they immediately destroy it. This kid just looking at her and knowing it's like, no, she's bad.
Hmm.
Go like they're not even seduced in. Um, that seems like that seems to be a good thing.
Hmm.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I struggled with this for like an hour while I was putting the slides together, and I could not come up with like this is clearly what this is about, and I've got it all. I just don't know.
Right. And the I mean, I assume the last slide is like the actual ending. Maybe
Yeah,
we read that
yeah,
and we wrap it up there.
sure. Let's do it.
So the last slide is Don shoots the lynx. Hey, mister, said the security guard, coming nearer across the sand. You cut your hand all to hell. Had to, Don said, and dropped the knife beside the pieces of the wasp. The enormous flaring voice had become a shrill piping scream. The guard, still red-faced and fuddled, looked down at the pieces of the wasp, twitching and rolling feverishly on the sand. Wasp, he said. Thought maybe that freak storm took you off the... Ah, he rubbed his mouth. Probably stung you right then, huh? Geez, I never knew those things live when they're, ah. Don was winding his shirt around his wounded hand, and he dropped it back into the salt water to help it heal. Guess you wanted revenge on the little sumbitch, huh? The guard said. I did, Don said, and met the man's baffled eyes and laughed. That's right, I did. Yeah, you got it, too, the guard said. Both of them watched the severed pieces of wasp rolling in the wet sand. That thing ain't even gonna give up the ghost. Doesn't look like it. Don used his shoe to scrape sand over the wriggling sections of the wasp. Even then, dimples and depressions in the sand showed that the thing continued to struggle. Tide'll come in and take it, the guard said. He motioned toward the sheds, the rank of curious men. Can we do anything for you? Could get you a truck out here. Call from the plant to get your car hauled out. Let's do that. Thank you. You got somewhere you gotta go in a hurry? Not in a hurry, Don said, knowing all at once what he had to do next. But there's a woman I have to meet in San Francisco. They began to go toward the sheds and the quiet men. Don stopped to look back, saw only sand. Now he could not even find the spot where he had buried it. Tide'll take that bastard halfway to Bolivia, the fat guard said. You don't want to worry about that any more, friend. It'll be fish food by 5 o'clock. Don tucked the knife into his belt and experienced a wave of love for everything mortal, for everything with a brief, definite lifespan, a tenderness for all that could give birth and would die, everything that could live, like these men in sunshine. He knew it was only relief and adrenaline, but if it was all the same, but it was all the same, a mystical, perhaps a sacred emotion. Dear Sears, dear Lewis, dear David, dear John, unknown, and dear Ricky and Stella, and dear Peter too, dear brothers, dear humankind. For a guy whose car is turned into salt rust, you look awful happy, the guard said. Yes, Don answered. Yes, I am. Don't ask me to explain it.
Well, now it all clearly makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
So one thing that was kind of bothering me as I did finish the book the first time and was listening to this is I was like, he's not gonna like step on the wasp, like it's not dead. It's not dead,
he hits it with the knife like 20 times.
but it's clearly still writhing. It's still writhing. It's not dead. It's
Don't worry about
horribly.
it. It's going to Bolivia.
It's gonna get washed out to sea and then it's just gonna come back.
It'll be fish food by 5 o'clock.
Yeah, but see, I don't buy that. Anyway, I don't buy that. See, I'm wondering if now that we're going full tinfoil on this book, I'm like maybe we're just not. Maybe we're just supposed to think like he fails. Actually, I don't know, man.
I don't know. Like, on the one hand, this idea of there's a woman I have to meet in San Francisco, right? So he's going to go deal with Alma's mother character, who is presumably another ghost. So, like, the book ends with this guy facing the things, right? Like, he's fighting back against the physical manifestation of the bad things he's done. So that's a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Sure. Yeah, he's trying to right wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure.
Why did it turn into a wasp?
I don't know. I mean,
The first time I read this part, I had to reread the whole thing because I was like, wait, a wasp?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is it's actually something that's far weaker and smaller than what you thought it would than what you thought its nature was.
Mm-hmm.
Like all this thing really is it's this small,
Yeah.
like actually very vulnerable thing that
Once
that
you've
we
defeated the form that it's taken, it's like, especially in this moment, maybe that's how weak it was. That it's not going to turn into a lynx. All it can turn into is a little bug, and all it can do is sting you. I mean, that shows like the power of your rejection of it has like sapped of its power a little bit, right? So like,
yeah, when you finally do face it, it's the dread and the fear of the thing that makes it seem huge and terrifying and all consuming, and then when you actually face it, it's just a little wasp that you can easily just crush.
Yep.
And also, but also, like, I think another part of the power of it was like he was willing to basically die to kill it.
Yeah.
He totally should have died, actually.
Yeah.
Like the car accident he was in seemed to like I thought what was happening was like, okay, Don's gonna die and he's gonna take the creature with him in the car.
Yeah.
But he made it out, actually.
The one thing we haven't really talked about is Dr. Tenderfoot, who is the character that Don was creating for a novel he was going to write, which was kind of like Alma seized that character and became that character. And I think, again, it circles back to this idea that you create your own demons, your own ghosts. Those things are coming from you. They're reflections of you. So to circle back around, perhaps the reason why she is a small little girl is because that's what he was expecting. He was expecting her to be in the form of a small little girl. He was expecting it to be dealing with a child, and so that's what she is. And I don't know, like there's not a lot of fatherhood in this, so like I really find the interesting parts, like when she's asked who your parents are, she says he's my daddy now, right? Like it's really interesting that like I don't know if there's a fatherhood message in there going on, that she's like, there's nothing from Don in that in the past. So
yeah,
I just don't know, man. I love this book, I adore this book, but I'm gonna have to just get okay with the fact that I'm not entirely clear on this.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes me want to reread it. Like I have questions in mind now, at least, where for example, I'm like, why does she go after Don in the first place? Like,
Like the like at Berkeley.
yeah, like what has he done to deserve that? And the answer might be nothing. She just feeds basically,
Mm-hmm.
and she picked him
Mm-hmm.
randomly.
But
Oh,
it only works on people that are willing to be fed upon.
yeah, that are willing to dance that tango, right?
Yeah.
And we established that he's like not a great guy,
Yeah.
but it's like, well, is that enough? Does that qualify him as good hunting? And maybe it's as simple as that. I just want to reread with sort of these questions in mind.
Yeah, me too.
Um, this is one episode of the book club where in my mind I'm like, I wonder if like a year from now we do like part two, the reckoning, where we've like reread it and like I tried to figure it out better. I don't know. I mean, I think we get. I feel like sure about like 60% of it, and then just like radically unsure about 40% of it, which is not where I love to be. But some books are not as transparent as others. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is good for me in general because I like to crack things,
hmm
and I think sometimes you just have to be okay with the story not being cracked sufficiently, and
yeah,
just like this. I mean, like this, we've spent time talking about what does this mean,
hmm
but it's beautiful writing. I mean, like
yeah,
that's last paragraph there, like. He experienced a wave of love for everything mortal, for everything with a brief, definite lifespan. You know, it's like it's a beautiful sentiment, like
yeah,
this like just an appreciation for life that he never had before,
hmm
for living, because this is a man who's a horror writer. He's made his career writing about the dead and the
hmm
monsters, and this experience, he said, I love life, and
hmm
I'm so happy for the mystical, perhaps sacred emotion of mortality and
mm.
existence, and
I
Sears and Lewis and David, and I love Dear
yeah,
John Unknown because he never met John Jeffrey.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I had this thought when reading, but I forgot it until now. But the idea, as soon as they introduced the character who was a horror writer, I was like, oh, this is Stephen King again.
Uh huh.
We're having a character in the novel who is a writer of horror novels.
Yeah,
Um,
and this is
uh,
kind of what I mean about this book is trying to like take the entire genre of horror and make it all encompassing. I mean,
mhm,
like we talked about Night of the Living Dead, so it's bringing some horror movie stuff in. It's bringing horror fiction in. It's bringing this whole. It's bringing the idea of fae and fairy and the horror side of that, and it's bringing it all under this one central thing and saying like these stories, ghost stories, are just a manifestation of things in our past, in our lives that we're ashamed of and not dealing with and not processing.
mhm.
And I think it's brilliant and it's beautiful and I love it to death. But yeah, how this ending ties into that central idea, I just don't have a great grasp on.
Mhm. Yeah. I feel there's so much like solidly good in it. I think the problem is that you and I both we got stuck on the puzzle.
Yeah. Yep. It
And
happens. It
which
happens.
yeah, that's gonna happen sometimes. And one thing that I did not do before this is I did not like Google like what is the correct scholarly interpretation of Peter Straub's ghost story.
I really try not to do that because I don't. I want it to be a reflection of my thoughts and not of thoughts I'm regurgitated, whether conscious or not.
Yeah, and it's way more fun to try to work it out.
Yeah, definitely. The most fun, we would say.
Exactly.
All right, we've been going very, very long, Matt.
hmm
Extremely long. So I'm just going to move right into next month's book.
All right, sounds good.
And if people have any questions or further comments, feel free to send them while we're doing that. But next month, we are going to be talking about Old Man's War by John Scalzi. Scalzi? Scalzi. John
In,
Scalzi.
in my head, I say Scalzi.
I think it's Scalzi. So May 28th at 9:30 p.m. we'll be meeting to talk about this science fiction novel. Have you ever read any Scalzi?
No,
Me
No,
either.
I've heard about this novel for years and years and years.
I
Never
follow
read it
him.
though.
I follow him on Twitter, and I don't remember when I did that because I've never read any of his novels.
That's great.
But I follow him on Twitter. So yeah, we'll be back here Friday, May 28th for that. Please read that book and join us. And of course, if you have any questions or comments or complaints about me, not Matt, don't email with complaints about Matt, but you can reach out to doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia. So that's it. That's it. Thank you everyone for tuning in live. We really appreciate it. There was a little bit of good conversation, but it was mostly just me and you talking everyone's ears off.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's the way we like it.
Indeed.
No, just kidding. We like interaction too. But on this one, yeah, on this one, I really could have used some some phone of friends.
The problem with the Scott Pixum is that the reason why this didn't win the vote is because not enough people were interested in it. So then I pick it anyway, and all of our normal book clubbers are just like, okay, I'm not going to read it then.
Well, you know what? I'm just gonna blame the Pfizer for my inability to come up with a good explanation of these
There you go.
these opaque themes.
There you go. That's the real symptom of the vaccine.
Can't literary analyze.
There you go. There you go. All right. That's it. So if you're listening to this after the fact, if you're listening to the audio recording of this, go get John Scalzi's book, Old Man's War. Read it over the next month, and then join us next Friday to talk about it. Please do. It's so much fun to get to chat with people about this stuff. So hopefully we'll see you here next month, Friday, May 28th at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. Come on. It's a lot of fun. Come on.
Yes, please. If you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more stuff like this, then please head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating to support our organization. At any of the available Patreon levels, you'll get access to the ability to vote for the books we talk about each month on these shows, as well as a bunch of other cool exclusive features, which we put a lot of time into, and we hope you like. So go check that out.
Yeah, you'll get to vote on books that you like and not books that I pick and no one else wants to talk about.
Exactly.
All right, folks. Thank you so much, and we will see you next month.
Well, I'm glad you picked this book, Scott.
I am too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm really, other than my only real side effects is that my arm hurts pretty bad and I'm really tired. But that doesn't seem so bad, right?
No, that's not too bad. Hopefully it doesn't get any worse.
Yeah.
Thanks, Count. Thanks. We're going to go ahead and shut the stream down because it's late and I need to get my 3 hours of sleep in before my son wakes up. So
sounds good.
Thanks so much for hanging out, folks. It was a lot of fun. And don't go get Salem's Lot because we're starting Salem's Lot in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
So get Salem's Lot.
We'll do. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. You don't have to say "will do," Matt. You're gonna do it. You have to do it.
I will. I promise.